Chapter 214. So, I will ask you again seriously, are you sure you want me to train you? Looking at Sasuke standing in front of him, Nangongja said seriously with a slightly thin body and a young face. Just 3 days ago, Nangongja appeared in front of Sasuke. He used his strength to make Sasuke realize his powerlessness. Looking at Sasuke curled up on the ground, Nangongja left a note with his address. Nangongja knew that Sasuke would come to find him. Sasuke found him 3 days later. During these 3 days, Nangongja didn't know what Sasuke was thinking and wasn't interested to know. But when Sasuke asked him to train him to make him stronger, Nangongja asked such a question. Yes. Although Sasuke was young, he was very serious when facing Nangongja. My strength is still too weak. I want to defeat Itachi. I want to let the Uchiha clan stand proudly in front of everyone again. So I came here to find you and ask you to help me become stronger. Since you left your address, it naturally means that you are willing to help me. Naruto and Sakura, who are in the same class as you, have received my training, but it is completely different from what you want. I just use some common methods to let them adapt to this world, but you want me to teach you how to kill. I will be stricter and crueler. Since you have decided, I won't allow you to back out halfway. Putting the azure jade wine gourd in his hand beside him, Nangongja changed from sitting in the corridor to standing up, staring at Sasuke. Sasuke didn't say a word, but his eyes were very determined. Very well, then let's start now? Nangongja smiled. Although such a child wasn't cute, he was very interesting. Far more interesting than Sakura and Naruto combined. I actually don't know any ninjutsu, and I don't want to learn any ninjutsu. I only know the sword, only the sword to kill. I can only teach you how to use the sword, but before that, I want you to truly understand your weakness. Weakness. Sasuke heard Nangongja's words and said with a little self-mockery, you can only become strong when you know that you are weak, and you can only become proud when you experience humility. Weakness itself isn't a sin, not wanting to improve is. This sentence is somewhat interesting. Then let's see how weak we really are. Although it was a question, Nangongja didn't give Sasuke a chance to refute. A majestic momentum came out of Nangongja's body. The momentum that once subdued everyone in Blood Cloak Pavilion was released without reservation. Nangongja's murderous aura and hostility gradually outlined the phantom of Yama behind Nangongja. The phantom of Yama that was once awakened in the Banishment Senpai's illusion was now gradually controlled and used by Nangongja. What was Yama? It was an existence that dominated all lives and judged all lives. Even if it was just a phantom, Yama's eyes were exceptionally clear. The pure color with a kind of contempt for all living beings was undoubtedly revealed. Perhaps Sasuke was the only one who could describe the horror of Yama's illusion. Those eyes stared at him tightly as if they could see through him. Whether his good or bad deeds were seen through by Yama's eyes. Sasuke's body trembled and gradually bent under the pressure of momentum. His whole body slowly lowered to the ground. When Sasuke realized it, his body was almost completely close to the ground. Even his face was only an inch away from the ground. When I first came to Woodleaf, a senpai also treated me like this. Maybe it was because he was curious about me, or maybe it was because of a little bit of bad taste. At that time, I also struggled under his pressure as if I wanted to prove myself. With that, Nangongja couldn't help but think of Woodleaf's white-fanged Hatake Mauso, who was enough to be called his mentor and friend. Nangongja reached out and casually grabbed the green jade gourd beside him, and poured a mouthful of wine into his mouth. White Fang also had to give up his life under the persecution of Woodleaf's higher-ups. Wasn't White Fang's situation similar to his current situation? Would he end up like White Fang? White Fang was like Nangongja's example, constantly reminding Nangongja not to show a trace of weakness. Otherwise, not only would he lose his life, but also all his loved ones would fall into endless sorrow. At this moment, Sasuke couldn't hear Nangongja's words clearly, because Nangongja's pressure made Sasuke have to ignore the existence outside of himself. Compared to Nangongja, Sasuke's physical fitness and strength were much worse. If he really wanted to survive this kind of pressure, he had to ignore all distracting thoughts and explore all his potential. Sasuke's ears kept buzzing, and even his brain had bursts of tingling pain. It seemed that his body was warning him that it had reached a state of high load. Whether it was the sound of his heart beating, the sound of his blood flowing, the sound of his blood vessels expanding, or the sound of his bones rubbing because of the pressure, Sasuke could clearly feel it. Gradually, Sasuke's breathing became difficult. It was as if a ball of fire had been stuffed into his lungs, constantly burning the air and the alveoli inside. Every breath of air that Sasuke breathed in was like a stream of gasoline, constantly pouring on the fire. But Sasuke couldn't stop breathing and could only suffer like this. Sasuke's limbs were still in pain, but gradually, it was replaced by soreness that constantly attacked Sasuke's brain. Then even the soreness disappeared, leaving only an indescribable state of indifference. Sasuke seemed to have no limbs, no body. Only a vague consciousness was left, and that consciousness kept telling himself that he must persevere. Only by persevering would she be able to appear in front of her beloved brother in a dignified manner. Only then would she be able to live up to the blood that her parents had spilled. Only persevere. Chapter 215. Buzz. When Sasuke's consciousness was clear again, he found that there was a very loud roar in his ears. There was a layer of quilt covering his body. He wanted to reach out and lift the quilt, but no matter if it was his hands or other parts of his body, he couldn't exert any strength. Sure enough, did I try too hard? Sasuke only had this thought in his mind. When he tried to break free from Nangongja's coercion, there was a gap in his memory. Looking at his current appearance, it seems that he didn't succeed in breaking free from Nangongja's coercion. It was really a bit of a waste. Obviously, he was determined to awaken and become stronger under Nangongja's training, but the training just started and he already became this useless. Oh, you're already awake? Nangongja's voice sounded in Sasuke's ear. He was half leaning on the door looking at Sasuke. Although he couldn't exert any strength, Sasuke still forced himself to lift the heavy quilt on his body. Sorry? The training just started and I already became this useless. It's a bit disappointing. Sasuke still sounded very weak when he spoke. Obviously his body was in a very weak state. Don't say that. After all, it's the first training and I used a bit too much strength. I just wanted to test your current level of strength. It's normal that you can't withstand it. Nangongja waved his hand. Obviously he wasn't disappointed with Sasuke's performance. He used his full strength to exert coercion, and even an ordinary jonin might not be able to withstand it. Speaking of which, are you hungry? Nangongja looked at Sasuke and at the same time he slowly stroked his stomach. Although he could make some ordinary food, there was no way to compare with Mishiro and his sister's cooking. Nangongja was also a little tired of eating the food he made all the time. No, Rumble. Sasuke just said one word, wanting to say that he was not hungry. However, his stomach failed to live up to his expectations and growled. In an instant, his tender little face was covered with a layer of red. All right. Everyone has to eat. What's there to be shy about? Let's go, I'll take you out to eat. Nangongja saw Sasuke's appearance and couldn't help but laugh. Although this child had been trying his best to be as mature as an adult, his current embarrassed look made him look more like how an adult of his age should look. It was a subtle cuteness. Can you stand up on your own? Looking at Sasuke, Nangongja couldn't help but ask. Of course. Sasuke pressed his hand on the bed, trying to use it as a force to stand up, but after several attempts he couldn't succeed at all. Nangongja stepped forward and stretched out his hand. Looking at Nangongja's hand, Sasuke hesitated for a moment, but in the end he couldn't overcome the feeling of hunger in his heart, so he put his small hand on Nangongja's hand. Okay, then let's go. Nangongja smiled and pulled Sasuke out of the courtyard and onto the street. Nangong's place was a bit remote, so there weren't many people. It was late autumn, so everything felt a little bleak. Sasuke didn't pay attention to the surrounding scenery. Instead, he silently felt the heat from Nangongja's palm, and for a moment he didn't want to talk. Ever since his brother destroyed the Uchiha clan and his parents died, how long has it been since someone held his hand and took him to the street? Every day he would force himself to get up in the morning before dawn to practice. For a child, getting up early was the most difficult thing. But Sasuke did it with his own obsession, and even persevered day after day. When he first met Nangongja, Sasuke didn't have a good impression of Nangongja. After all, at that time, Nangongja looked so arrogant and unreasonable. He even used all kinds of words to provoke him. Although Sasuke didn't say it explicitly, for anyone who was treated like this, they would feel a little uncomfortable. So when Sasuke saw Nangongja's note with the address written on it, it could be said that Sasuke was actually mentally prepared to be severely tortured by Nangongja. Naturally, the result was not unexpected. Sasuke was already tortured by Nangongja for the first time, and it was difficult for him to exert his strength. However, this image of Nangongja was treating her so gently. Now he was holding his hand and strolling on the street with him. Even the slightly cold autumn wind made Sasuke's heart burn with a touch of warmth that couldn't be erased. Ah, this is the place. In the past, Naruto always told me that there was a super delicious restaurant in Woodleaf, but it wasn't famous, so I always wanted to come here to try it. Today I finally have the time to come and try it. Don't worry, you've worked hard today. Eat to your heart's content, I'll pay for it. Nangongja shouted at a shabby-looking restaurant with some unknown excitement, then turned his head to Sasuke and promised to eat as much as he wanted. Sasuke was also pulled out of his thoughts and looked at the restaurant in front of him, which had the words Yuraku written on it. It was obviously a very ordinary restaurant, and even the decorative wooden board at the door looked a little broken. However, this place strangely gave off a warm feeling, as if he had returned to his own home. Nangongja lifted the curtain hanging in front of the Yuraku ramen door, and a rough voice sounded. "Welcome." Handa looked at the two slightly unfamiliar customers and said very warmly, "Is there any signature ramen here? It's my first time here, boss, can you recommend it to me?" Nangongja looked at Handa's enthusiastic appearance and asked with a smile. "Customer, why don't you try our barbecued pork ramen? Many people like to eat this kind of ramen." Handa thought for a moment and said to Nangongja. Nangongja pulled Sasuke over and let him sit on the chair. "Is that so? Then I'll have a big bowl of barbecued pork ramen. What about you, Sasuke?" Sasuke looked at Nangongja, then looked at Handa and said coldly, "I also want barbecued pork." Although Sasuke's expression was a little ugly, Handa and Nangongja looked at each other and smiled as if they found it very interesting. Then he shouted with his hand. "Okay, 2 bowls of barbecued pork ramen coming soon." Chapter 216. Soon, 2 bowls of steaming ramen were placed in front of Nangongja and Sasuke. Along with the steam, there was the unique fragrance of the broth made from kunbu and seaweed. The fragrance immediately made Nangongja's appetite. Eating his own cooking for the past few days was really a kind of self-torture. Now that he could finally have a good meal, it was really touching. Looking at Sasuke next to him, the little guy also began to swallow his saliva. "Well, since you're here, let's eat to our heart's content." Nangongja smiled and patted Sasuke's shoulder, then said with a smile. He and Sasuke looked at each other and together they put their hands together, clamped the chopsticks in their palms and shouted together, "I'm going to eat." Whether it was Nangongja or Sasuke, both of them hurriedly broke the disposable chopsticks in their hands and picked up the bowl of ramen in front of them. Nangongja took a sip of the soup, and the rich taste instantly filled Nangongja's entire mouth. Then Nangongja began to eat heartily. Nangongja kept the bowl of ramen in his mouth, and soon the whole bowl of ramen was almost empty. After Nangongja finished the last mouthful of soup in his hand, he stretched the empty bowl in front of him. Just as he was about to talk to his opponent, Sasuke, who was next to him, also stretched out the empty bowl in his hand. He glanced at Nangongja with an arrogant face and then said to his opponent, Brother Sasuke, another bowl." Nangongja saw Sasuke's current childlike appearance and smiled slightly. Instead of letting a person lose his most precious childhood for his own purposes, why not let him truly enjoy the childhood that belonged to him? To be able to see a child who was originally very gloomy and cold slowly open his heart and express his feelings, learning to accept others and learn to understand himself was a very joyous thing. "I'll have another bowl too." Nangongja smiled at his hand and said so. The happiest thing for every chef was that the food they cooked could be eaten by the customers happily. Sasuke, who originally didn't look very happy, also became energetic because of eating his ramen. It's really great. Hand was also a person with children, and it was a very happy thing for him to see the energetic appearance of a child. Just as he was about to turn around and call out Nangongja and Sasuke's menu, the curtain of Ichiraku ramen was lifted again. Hand looked at the people who came and said enthusiastically, "Welcome. Welcome, you haven't patronized my business for a long time." Although there was a little complaint in his tone, Han was obviously very happy that his regulars could come to eat ramen. "Uncle Slap, don't say that. I had to pester my mother to come here to eat." A voice full of vitality sounded, and Nangongja became more and more familiar with it. As soon as he turned his head, he saw a child with golden hair being pulled into Ichiraku ramen by a red-haired lady. When Nangongja saw Naruto, Naruto also saw Nangongja. All of a sudden Naruto became excited. He directly rushed into Nangongja's arms and shouted happily, "Uncle Nangong, you're here too." It seemed that when he saw the empty bowl in front of Nangongja, Naruto became even happier. "How is it? The taste of this ramen is super good, right? I like the ramen here the most. Whether it's the soup base, the ingredients, or the ramen, they are all super delicious. But I don't know why so few people come here." At the beginning, Han was still smiling as he watched Naruto praise his ramen. But as he talked, Naruto started complaining that there weren't many customers in Ichiraku ramen. Ichiraku directly picked up the kind of net used to cook ramen at hand. He really wanted to hit Naruto's head a few times to let him know how unbearable the anger of the owner of a ramen shop was. But there was a person who directly punched Naruto's head. Naturally, this person was Naruto's mother, Shina Kushina. "You little bastard, how can you talk like that? Ichiraka ramen is really cold. Cough cough. It's really delicious. Hey, you were going to say it's cold, right? Don't cover it up with a dry cough." Naruto directly looked at his mother with tears in his eyes, as if to say that he was not lying. She looked pitiful, but it was very funny. Nangongja looked at the way Naruto and Shina Kushina got along with each other, but he was not surprised at all. On the contrary, he seemed to be very used to it. That's right, Naruto often went to Nangongja's house when he was a child. The scene of Shina Kushina beating Naruto seemed to have happened many times. Idiot! Behind Nangongja, Sasuke, who was originally very happy, became cold again at this moment. Then he looked at Naruto and said. At this time, Naruto finally noticed Sasuke behind Nangongja, and he seemed to be very surprised. Pointing his finger at Sasuke, Naruto began to chatter. "Why is it this arrogant guy? If there is an arrogant guy, the originally delicious ramen will not taste good." Hearing Naruto's words, Sasuke was also angry. "Who are you calling arrogant guy? You idiot. Whoever agreed is an arrogant guy. Last place. Idiot. With you here, the ramen is really not delicious. Children's quarrel is always so boring, and it even makes people feel that they can feel a kind of childish fun." Whether it was Shina Kushina, Nangongja, or Shota, they all looked at the two children with a smile, but Sasuke and Naruto were a little embarrassed. The two children sat in the seats of Ichiraka ramen, looking at each other, but they kept eating the ramen in their hands. Sometimes they even choked because they ate too fast and a little bit of soup flowed out of their noses. The two children sulked, but Nangongja quietly pulled Shina Kushina out of the door of Ichiraka ramen. "Why only you and Naruto came? Where is Watergate?" Nangongja was obviously a little confused. Even if Naruto and Watergate didn't fully understand each other, such a family dinner should not be missing Watergate. Shina Kushina shook her head and seemed to be very upset. "Watergate is in Hokage's office and he hasn't been home since yesterday. It seems that Woodleaf's top management has a lot of resentment towards Watergate." Chapter 217. Not to mention Naruto and Sasuke, who were quarreling with each other, and Shina Kushina, who was standing outside Ichiraka ramen with a depressed face. In a secret room in the Hokage office, Watergate, Three Generations, Danzo, Zhuan Shaochun, and Mito Monitis, these five people could almost represent the entire Woodleaf decision-making team. Danzo was looking at the gloomy faces of Three Generations and Watergate, as well as Zhuan Shaochun and Mito Monitis, who seemed to be thinking about something. Just a day ago, Danzo mentioned to the elders of Kiba the impeachment report against the fourth Hokage, Watergate. Watergate had just returned to Woodleaf for a few days. Danzo had already prepared a lot of pages of the impeachment report and directly submitted it to the elders of Kiba. Although Hokage had always been the one who appeared in public in Woodleaf and conveyed various orders about the Woodleaf, but in fact, Woodleaf had a 2.5 system of decision-making structure. Hokage was part of it and the elders of Kiba were part of it. Together, they formed the so-called 2.5 system, and the daimyo of the Fire Country occupied the half position. Of course, now that it was related to the appointment of the Hokage within Woodleaf, the daimyo of the Fire Country couldn't directly appear, so they didn't send their own representatives to participate in the meeting. As the supervision of the Hokage, the Woodleaf elders played a decisive role in this meeting. The elders of Woodleaf were composed of large and small families and businessmen who occupied important positions in the business. Zhuan Shaochun and Mito Monitis could actually be said to represent the interests of these large and small families and businessmen. "Our meeting has been going on for nearly 2 days. I don't know what the representatives of the two elders of the elders think about it. Do you want to let Watergate vote on his impeachment at the elders of the elders meeting?" Danzo looked at Mito Monitis and Zhuan Shaochun, who were hesitating, and his expression was a bit bad. The two of them obviously wanted to suppress the matter and quietly resolve it among themselves. But Danzo has already cornered a lot of members of the elders of Kiba, and constantly put pressure on the representatives of the two elders. As the 3 generations of the Hokage, Yuan Fei was very well known, and no one could find any fault with him, so Danzo couldn't do anything about it. But as the 4th Hokage, Watergate, not long after he inherited the position of Hokage, and even when his team was not fully formed, he gave up the position of Hokage of Woodleaf and directly pushed the retired Sandaime to the shinobi world. No matter what the reason is, such behavior has made many of the elders feel that Watergate is not the right person to ensure the safety of Woodleaf. This is also the main reason why Danzo was able to gather enough people to put pressure on the elders. As a part of Woodleaf's power, the various families have instinctively felt some danger from Watergate's somewhat willful behavior. Danzo. Although Woodleaf does have a bill related to the impeachment of Hokage, Woodleaf has never used it since the establishment of the village. Moreover, Watergate is already the fourth Hokage of Woodleaf. Once such a person known by the shinobi world is deprived of the position of Hokage, we will be in an awkward position. Konoha will be in an extremely awkward position, not to mention how we will choose the next Hokage. We will also have to face a crisis of trust. As a Woodleaf that accepts commissions from the outside world to get the funds needed to operate, the most important thing is to maintain the trust in the hearts of all potential clients. Once we change our own Hokage, the number of tasks we receive will definitely drop significantly. Such a price, whether it is me, Danzo, or even all the Woodleaf ninjas, can we really afford it? Mito Monitis looked at Danzo. In fact, his mood was not very good. For a long time, although there has always been a little friction between him and the elders led by Zhuan Shaochun, but overall it is very stable, and he has always been able to ensure that he can make a sound and maintain his credibility in Woodleaf. But Danzo did not know what means he used to make many elders stand on Danzo's side. This sense of humiliation and the feeling of being violated made Mito Monitis very uncomfortable. So, can a Hokage who can act according to his own will and abandon the entire Woodleaf really make the people of the shinobi world feel that Woodleaf is trustworthy enough? Whether it is me or the elders, when Watergate left Woodleaf, did anyone get the notice? We are completely in the dark. If Yuan Fei did not stand up and temporarily take over the position of Hokage, what kind of chaos would Woodleaf be in? Danzo actually knew that when Watergate left Woodleaf, he must have informed the three generations, but Danzo deliberately ignored this point. In the duel system, the status of the elders has been declining a little bit, because Hokage has always been a relatively strong position. Many times the elders have been forgotten. At this time, if Yuan Fei stood up and took the blame for Watergate, if he said that Watergate actually discussed with him, then how would the elders of Kiba feel? This impeachment, it seems that the spearhead is directed at Watergate, but in fact, it wants to weaken the credibility of the entire Hokage clan. The impeachment will not succeed. Even Danzo was very clear in his heart. But once the credibility of the Hokage clan is reduced, whether it is the elders or his root, they will get greater benefits. Nangongja returned to the village for so long, but Danzo did not look for Nangongja at all. The fundamental reason is that Danzo is busy playing games with the elders and the three generations. Nangongja, who is relatively less valuable, can be temporarily ignored. Sandame took a deep puff from his tobacco pipe. Wisps of smoke drifted out from the tobacco pipe, shining with a red light. But the eyes of the three generations were only staring at Danzo. As an old man who has known Danzo for many years, in fact, three generations can only see a little bit of Danzo's plan. But the three generations absolutely cannot let Watergate step down from the position of fourth Hokage. It is not so easy to cultivate a person who is qualified to be the Hokage. Once they let go, it is really hard to say who will be the Hokage in the end. All the tricks of Danzo have been put on the surface, have become a real conspiracy. Chapter 218. Danzo's sharp words have forced Mito Monitis, Zhuan Shaochun, and Yuan Fei into a very awkward situation. However, no matter what, as the fourth Hokage, Watergate must not be overthrown, otherwise, it will only cause greater losses. The most urgent thing now is to find a person who will take the blame for Watergate, and this person's status must not be low, otherwise how can he order around the fourth Hokage? In any case, this impeachment proposal can't be passed by just the two of us. If we must find a person to calm the resentment in the hearts of the people, then let me do it. Anyway, I'm already so old, it doesn't matter if a little bit of dirty water is poured on me. But Watergate is still young, he still has to do more meaningful things for the Woodleaf. Looking at Zhuan Shaochun, Mito Monitis directly stood up, saying that he will clear Watergate's name, and all the mistakes will be placed on him. However, Danzo wasn't satisfied with Mito Monitis coming forward to take all the blame. He looked coldly at Mito Monitis. Danzo said with a sneer. Hamura, are you old and confused? Do you think the people of Woodleaf are so easy to bully? You are just a representative of the elders of Kiba. How can you order around the Woodleaf's hope, who has the strength and support of the fourth Hokage? Danzo's words were half flattering and half attacking, making all the people in the room unable to relax. First of all, Danzo can be said to have ruthlessly attacked the status of the elders of Kiba, and secondly, he was also looking down on Mito Monitis and Zhuan Shaochun. Danzo, you bastard. Mito Monitis was also an impatient person, When he heard Danzo looking down on him and the elders of Kiba, he directly slammed the table. Whether it was his beard or his hair, they all stood up in anger. It seems that if he couldn't hold it in, he would step forward and fight Danzo to the death. But Zhuan Shaochun quietly cast his eyes on the three generations. The three generations have been in power for a long time. Whether it is Mito Manitas' performance, Zhuan Shaochun's gaze, or Danzo's aggressiveness, the three generations actually saw through them. The only one who can clear Watergate's name and take the blame for him is himself. From a personal point of view, he is Watergate's advisor. His own disciple made a mistake, so naturally he should solve it. From a political point of view, Minato's position as the fourth Hokage was also promoted by Kuroto. Since Kuroto wanted to list Minato as a candidate for the position of Hokage, Kuroto also had to bear the crime of not being able to judge people properly. Whether it is Mito Manitas, Zhuan Shaochun, or Shimura Danzo from the beginning, their goal is him and the legacy of the first Hokage. Gently coughing a few times, the three generations knocked the pipe in his hand on the table, and the remaining gray ash and sporadic fire directly floated on the ground. Hamura, you sit down. This kind of thing is not worth arguing with Danzo. They are all old people. Whether it is doing or speaking, it is best to be a little more mature. That's right, Minato can't be replaced. If someone has to bear the responsibility, then let this old man do it. Anyway, I am going to retire, and things like reputation are not worth caring about. When Watergate left the village, he and I discussed it, and no matter what the process was, in the end I let Watergate go. Let me bear the responsibility. There is nothing to worry about. We have been in this meeting for 2 days, so let's stop here. Let this old man bear all the consequences. Everyone can go back now. Mito Manitas looked at Watergate, who was sitting in the corner without saying a word, and sighed slightly. Mito Manitas stood up, and just as he was about to say something, three generations waved his hand and interrupted him. Go back. There is no need to say so much. Whether it was Zhuan Shaochun, Mito Manitas, or Shimura Danzo, they all symbolically bowed to three generations before turning around and leaving the large conference room. Only three generations and Watergate were left in the large conference room. Three generations once again filled his tobacco pipe with shredded tobacco, and a rough hand swept across the tobacco pipe, causing it to burn on its own. The smoke produced by the shredded tobacco slowly began to fill the sealed conference room, as if a thin veil was covering everyone's face, causing everything to fall into a haze. After a long time, three generations finally took the lead to speak. Watergate, how do you feel about this kind of meeting? Watergate shook his head, and he seemed to be in a bad mood as he spoke. When I was on a mission, I saw some local officials handling cases. The criminals were tied up and forced to kneel in the hall, and they could only passively accept the judgment. Although I didn't have my hands tied with a rope, it still felt somewhat similar. Being judged like this, being criticized like this, and not being able to fight in my own hands really made me feel bad. Three generations saw Watergate's somewhat vexed face and smiled instead. You're still too young. Although my life seems to be glorious, it's not rare for me to break my teeth and swallow my pride. We're born as humans and we're destined to face all kinds of problems. Some of them are provoked by you and some of them you can't resist at all. These things can't be avoided. Did you see what those people were trying to do? Watergate wasn't a stupid person. Although this meeting was to decide whether his impeachment would pass, he was actually just an excuse. Only when these people wanted to prove their righteous position, would they pull out Watergate's actions and criticize him a few times, but in fact their goal wasn't that at all. They're just not satisfied with the power in their hands and they want to have more power in Woodleaf. I can still understand these things. Three generations looked at Watergate's slightly depressed face and smiled as if the person who was forced to abdicate wasn't him at all. It's good that you can see it. When I took over, Woodleaf was still very united, so the situation was a little better than yours. What you need to face now is Root, who is fully fledged, and the family alliance that thirsts for power. The key is to let go of some things at the right time so that they can temporarily settle down and receive more opportunities to strengthen their power. Chapter 219. The three generations looked at Watergate in front of them and saw that Watergate's complexion was still not very good, so they knew that Watergate still hasn't completely gotten over it. But some things are still the most important thing to understand slowly, so the three generations didn't intend to entangle too much on this matter. Since you have returned to Woodleaf, then I think you have already found out some information about that organization, right? Is there any valuable information? The three generations also consciously changed the topic and began to ask Watergate about the results of his investigation in the ninja world. Yes, this is an organization that mainly operates in the Rain Country. They call themselves Akatsuki, and they think that they are an organization that brings light to the ninja world. Watergate organized his words and said to the three generations, "Such an organization? Although the purpose of their propaganda sounds very powerful, but if you think about it carefully, I feel that something is wrong. Bringing light to the ninja world, it does sound very powerful, but it still makes people feel a little scared, and they always feel that this organization is not simple. Indeed, when I investigated them in the ninja world, I have seen many traces left behind after their actions. Even if the battle of ninjas does have a greater impact on the natural landscape, they seem to have reached the point of being unscrupulous, and many innocent lives will be affected by their battle. Just based on what I know, there are already 4 or 5 villages that have been destroyed because of their actions." Watergate was also angry because generally speaking, ninjas will choose to fight in no man's land. Such actions that cause a large number of civilian casualties are rare in the ninja world, because all civilians are, to some extent, the potential customers of every ninja village. If their customers are greatly reduced, doesn't it mean that their income will also be greatly reduced? No ninja village will do such a stupid act of killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. Although Watergate seemed to be filled with righteous indignation, the three generations were very calm. On the surface, ninjas will take the initiative to avoid civilians to fight, but in many cases, it is completely impossible to avoid civilian casualties, but whether it is made public or not still depends on the result of the discussion between the ninja village and the government. Woodleaf wasn't such a clean place. Then, do you have any leads on their leader? The three generations were obviously more concerned about who was the leader of this organization. Yes, if there is no accident, the leader of this organization is 2 of the 3 disciples that Jiraiya-sensei once taught in the Rain Country. They are Nagato and Conan. Hearing Nagato's name, the 3 generations were obviously a little shocked. The child named Nagato had the eyes of Hagoromo Sennin. Although Watergate wasn't clear about such information as Jiraiya-sensei, Jiraiya had told him about it. The child with the Rinnegan, who Jiraiya said was most likely to be the child of prophecy, in the Great Toad Sage's prophecy, was enough to leave a deep impression on the 3 generations. Sensei knows the most about these 2 people, so I returned to Woodleaf, hoping to meet with Sensei and discuss about them. Watergate's idea was very simple. His sensei, Jiraiya, as the person who taught Nagato and Conan, was naturally the most qualified person to speak on the actions of these 2 people. The 3 generations, because they knew more information, also felt that they shouldn't act without authorization, so they also agreed with Watergate's plan to recall Jiraiya. Well, everything will wait for Jiraiya to come back and think about it. Time passed day by day and Woodleaf was the same as usual. Except for the documents issued by the 3 generations a few days ago, stating that Watergate went to the shinobi world to perform a secret mission with his permission, and now he has officially returned to take over the position of Hokage, there was no other news worth paying attention to. However, Nangongja's home wasn't as stable as Woodleaf seemed on the surface. Nangongja was sitting in his living room at the moment, receiving a person he didn't want to see. 2 coarse porcelain quilts were filled with steaming hot tea. The 2 of them sat facing each other like this. However, root ninjas were constantly patrolling around Nangongja's house, and some passers-by who occasionally passed by were blocked by root. To be honest, I never thought you would be so bold. You destroyed one of my bases, and you dare to come back to Woodleaf so openly. Shimura Danzo looked at Nangongja opposite him, and his tone was very calm as if his vase was broken by a naughty boy and he didn't care at all. My courage has always been big, right? This time, if I didn't happen to meet Watergate and was directly pulled back to Woodleaf by him, it really wouldn't be the time for us to meet again. Nangongja picked up the quilt in front of him and took a sip of tea. But his brows slightly wrinkled, obviously compared to the bitter tea he preferred the mellow wine. Danzo didn't seem to hear the threat in Nangongja's tone. He casually rolled his eyes in Nangongja's house, then looked at Nangongja as if he found something interesting. You still don't have enough courage, otherwise our organization Sora and your sister would probably come back with you. Hearing the code name Sora, Nangongja couldn't suppress his anger anymore. The hand holding the teacup trembled slightly, and a drop of tea was shaken out of the quilt. These things that Danzo said were the most untouchable things in Nangongja's heart. His sister, Mashiro, and little linger in Danzo's mouth, it was like an object used to threaten Nangongja. But Danzo said it so casually, it really made Nangongja feel very uncomfortable in his heart. Danzo. Although you do have root in your hands, Woodleaf is not only Danzo's Woodleaf. It's better not to be too aggressive. Nangongja's eyes slightly glanced in the direction of the Hokage office. Watergate's subordinates are still young, as a person with superior strength, Nangongzhe is the best candidate to win over. Because he absolutely has no involvement with Root and the elders of Kiba. Even because his family was kidnapped by Root, Woodleaf White Fang, who was his teacher and friend, committed suicide under the influence of Root. It's a pity that such a person is not in his hands. Chapter 220. Hearing Nangongzhe's threatening words, Danzo didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed in a mocking and pitiful way. I really didn't expect that just a kid who is still wet behind the ears and a person who is already half dead could bring you such a sense of security. You are still as naive as before. Since you are so confident that they will bring you shelter, then let's wait and see how much help they can provide you. At the beginning, Danzo thought that Nangongzhe was actually a somewhat naive kid. Just by relying on his own strength, he felt that he could live a good life in Woodleaf. Now, with just a promise from the Hokage clan, he could be so confident, which really made Danzo feel a little funny. But was Nangongzhe really as naive as Danzo thought? How could Nangongzhe not have the slightest progress over the years? When Nangongzhe knew that he had to find the Blood Cloak Pavilion to increase his strength, Nangongzhe knew that strength was just a part of his life. Countless tricks, countless conspiracies, all of them were things that he had to guard against. Here, Nangongzhe was just following Danzo's impression of him, showing weakness to the enemy. If Nangongzhe really put everything he had on the Hokage clan, then he was really naive to a certain extent. There was no such thing as trust when it came to using each other. As long as one side had a better choice, the cooperation would naturally disappear. Nangongzhe didn't believe anything about Woodleaf. Danzo was too lazy to communicate with Nangongzhe. He directly got up and was ready to leave Nangongzhe's house. After taking a deep look at Nangongzhe, Danzo directly turned and left. Naturally, the ninjas from Root also followed Danzo. At this moment, Watergate has been standing at the gate of Woodleaf for a long time. The flame on his Haori was blown by the wind from time to time, and the words, "Fourth Hokage," on the back seemed to be shining under the sun. Watergate has been standing here since the morning. From time to time he would greet some ninjas coming and going, but he didn't leave. It seemed like he was waiting for someone important. Finally, the sun has rotated in the sky, and a familiar figure finally appeared in front of Watergate's eyes. The slightly gray hair and painted face entered Watergate's eyes for a moment. For some reason, Watergate's eyes were covered with mist. The person who came was his master, one of Woodleaf's Sannin Jiraiya. "Oh, isn't this Watergate? You're still so energetic." From a distance, Jiraiya waved his hand. Apparently he saw Watergate and greeted him. Watergate wasn't as casual as Jiraiya. He bowed to Jiraiya with both hands. Watergate said very seriously, "Welcome back, master. Do you still need to be so formal with me? I hate trouble the most. You're really making me a little unhappy." Jiraiya just came back, and seeing Watergate's appearance, he seemed to feel a little troublesome. But from the slightly red eyes, it was obvious that Jiraiya was still very happy to see his disciple, and he was very excited. Perhaps this is a way for Jiraiya to hide his inner thoughts? Speaking of which, why are you and the old man so anxious to let me come back? The letter to me was also very vague. It just said that there was an important discovery and I came back from far away. Indeed, looking at Jiraiya's appearance, he did look a little travel-worn. His gray hair was covered in a thin layer of dust, and his face, which was painted red, showed signs of tiredness that could not be ignored. "It's a big deal. Let's go meet the 3 generations together and talk about these things." Speaking of business, Watergate's face became more serious. "Has the old man been waiting for me? Although I'm not in Woodleaf, I still know a little about the recent news about the old man. It seems that during this time, the old man can only stay in his own home and wait for the limelight to pass." Yes, the news about the 3 generations taking the blame for Watergate has spread far and wide. Although many people in the ninja world don't know the inside story, they really think that Watergate left Woodleaf because of some mission, but how can Jiraiya not know? This notice looked like an ordinary one, but it wasn't enough to throw Sandame's old face to the ground and stomp on it. Sandame even used his foot to crush it. "This is all my fault." It's okay if Jiraiya didn't mention it, but when Jiraiya said such a thing, Watergate felt very uncomfortable. After all, this big blame was created by him, and he even had to watch the 3 generations take the blame without doing anything. Jiraiya also saw the sadness in his disciple's heart. He took a few steps forward and put his hand on Watergate's shoulder and said, "Why are you like this?" In my impression, my disciple named Watergate is a person who can still face any setbacks with a smile. Although this matter has indeed damaged the old man's reputation, it is also something that we, the elders, should do. For the future of the ninja world, not to mention a blame even if you give up your life, what's the pity? Look at it. Since you feel guilty now, naturally you have to be more courageous and make a real contribution to let everyone know that whether it's me or the old man's sacrifice, it's not only for our disciples, but also for the future of Woodleaf. Jiraiya, who was still laughing and joking, said to Minato with a serious tone. At the age of Jiraiya and the 3 generations, some of their own things have become very light. What's the point of the world slandering me? As long as what I do can make me feel worthy, then everything else is not worth mentioning. Watergate looked up at Jiraiya. In fact, many people have said similar words to him in the past few days, but when such words came from his master's mouth, Watergate could understand his own heart. His eyes, which originally looked sad, glowed with a glimmer of brilliance at this moment. Holding his master's hand, Watergate and Jiraiya walked into Woodleaf together. Just like when he was young, Jiraiya took his hand and walked with him in Woodleaf. Chapter 221. In the mansion of the 3 generations, Jiraiya, 3 generations, and Watergate were sitting at a small wooden table. Obviously, they were talking about some extremely important topics because the 3 of them didn't look so good. So, Watergate's investigation proved that the organization that attacked Woodleaf was actually created by my disciples in the Rain Country? Jiraiya seemed to be a little sad and his voice was very low. Yes, I wasn't sure about the identity of their leader. But when I met Nangongja on the road, combined with his description and some clues I found, I did point everything to Nagato and Konan, who were among the disciples that Sensei once accepted in the Rain Country. Watergate repeated everything he knew to 3 generations and Jiraiya, but Jiraiya still looked a little strange. Whether it was 3 generations or Watergate, they saw it clearly. Obviously, there was a discrepancy in the information between the 2 sides. Because Jiraiya also investigated everything about Akatsuki in the ninja world over the years, it was normal to get some information. Sensei, do you have any doubts? Jiraiya didn't say some information about himself, so Watergate had to ask. Indeed, I have collected a lot of information about this organization over the years. The name, Akatsuki, has a lot of information that matches what I have collected, but in my information, the one who controls the Akatsuki is not Nagato, and I don't even have the slightest bit of information about the red-haired boy. But a person named Pain is the actual leader of Akatsuki, and the ninja who uses paper release is definitely my former disciple Konan. Nagato? Watergate didn't expect that his information would be so different from the information collected by Jiraiya. From Jiraiya's description, Watergate already knew that Nagato was a red-haired young man. But Jiraiya said that no ninja with red hair was found in Akatsuki. In fact, I also found the problem with Jiraiya. Woodleaf has quietly put a nail in Akatsuki. Because of various reasons, it's not convenient for me to disclose the truth to you. Our undercover agent from time to time has indeed pointed out that every time Akatsuki organization's leader is a person with orange hair who seems to have Rinnegan. And there is another news. 3 generations said but couldn't help but look at Jiraiya. There was unconcealable sadness in his eyes. When Jiraiya heard 3 generations say this and even showed such a look, he couldn't help but panic. It seemed that this person had a deep relationship with him in 3 generations. Gently opening his mouth, Jiraiya spat out the name of a person who used to be his best friend, but gradually drifted away and went on a different path. Orochimaru. The Sandaime nodded silently, apparently also immersed in his memories. The child who was very enthusiastic about ninjutsu, the child with a cold face and a warm heart, was completely gone now. Only a lunatic who almost had a paranoid desire for immortality, and even crossed the bottom line again and again. Our undercover agent doesn't seem to get along very well with Orochimaru. There were a lot of fights between the two. But it's certain that Orochimaru won't leave Akatsuki in a short time, and he seems to have a very deep cooperation with Akatsuki. Although 3 generations didn't explain the specific content of the cooperation, but thinking about what Orochimaru did in the past, it naturally wasn't a good thing. It must have involved the lives of countless people, as well as the use of forbidden techniques. So what are we going to do with this Akatsuki? Watergate couldn't help but ask. His master and master were so immersed in the memories of the past that there was no way to solve the problem they were facing now. In any case, since Akatsuki has already attacked Ninetales once, then naturally there will be a second time and a third time. This is a major event related to the life of his wife and child. Watergate couldn't just ignore it. We still need to hold back for the time being since Akatsuki has been silent for so many years. They must have a lot of plans, although we know some information about them. But such shallow information can't let us know their purpose. No matter how good a snake is at hiding, when the time comes, it will absolutely not hold back. We just need to strengthen the protection of Naruto, and at the same time, step up the investigation of them. We must hit them directly on their weak point. We can't give them a chance to reignite. Jiraiya was very calm and made his own conclusion. Jiraiya didn't know how many times he had seen a snake that didn't die, and it would hurt them. Killing them with one blow was the best action. Moreover, Woodleaf couldn't afford such a large-scale deployment of people. Because once a large-scale mobilization of ninjas, some of the contradictions within the village will completely erupt, and the loss will simply outweigh the gain. Now what Woodleaf needed most was to stabilize, gradually reconcile and solve some of its own contradictions, and then think about more things. This is the so-called internal stability must be stabilized first. But Watergate still wanted to say something, but he was stopped by 3 generations. Jiraiya is right, Woodleaf is indeed not a good time to mobilize ninjas on a large scale. Akatsuki is indeed a threat, but they can't make Woodleaf fall into the trap of destruction. But once we act rashly and stimulate all the problems within the village, then Woodleaf will be in a lot of turmoil. Looking at 3 generations and looking at his master, Watergate's originally hot heart instantly became a little cold. Sure enough, now it's only his wife and children who are threatened, not the entire Woodleaf. Even if he is the Hokage of Woodleaf, there is no way to mobilize the power of the village to protect his wife and children. The reason why the Sandaime agreed to use part of his power to protect his wife and children was because he was his grand disciple. If he wasn't his disciple, he wouldn't even have such a protective force, right? This was the attitude that a superior should have, putting everything on a scale and weighing every ounce. As long as it is in his own interest and the interest of the village, what can't he give up? Chapter 222. Clang. The sound of metal clashing sounded in the courtyard of Nangongja's house, and a handful of dust flew in the courtyard. Sasuke shook his head and shook off the dust stuck on his head. But his eyes were extremely unwilling because he could be said to have the upper hand. Well, not bad, your strength has obviously increased a lot. Even if you fight against a Chunin, you may not necessarily lose, at least you can delay for a long time. And this is just you using the sword skills I taught you. If you can fully use the strange means that you have as a ninja and keep a calm heart, then defeating a Chunin is not impossible. Nangongja leaned on a wooden sword made of oak in his hand and looked at Sasuke with satisfaction. It's not the same. I'm using a long sword made of metal used by ninjas, and you're just using a wooden sword. Even so, I still haven't gained any particularly obvious advantage. Although Sasuke was not convinced before, after calming down a little, Sasuke found a huge gap between himself and Nangongja. The sword in his hand was made of metal specially provided by ninjas. If an iron sword collided with such a long sword, it would be directly cut in two in an instant. But looking at the long sword in his hand with a little gap on the blade, and then looking at Nangongja's oak sword, Sasuke clearly saw the gap between himself and Nangongja. I didn't let you use ninjutsu and Kekkei Genkai just now, so you didn't fully use your strength. If you really used these powers, I would have a lot of trouble just relying on sword skills. Yes, now Sasuke can use the Uchiha clan's Kekkei Genkai, Sharingan. From the beginning, when Itachi used genjutsu to recreate the scenes of his clansmen being slaughtered and his parents being ruthlessly deprived of their lives, Sasuke has been greatly stimulated and awakened the one-tomo form of Sharingan, but he has been subconsciously suppressing his own power. Nangongja has already noticed this power sleeping in Sasuke's body. For 3 years, Nangongja has not only taught Sasuke swordsmanship, but also helped Sasuke stabilize the power of his Sharingan. Of course, during this period, Nangongja also returned to the Lion Clan's space more than once to ask Uchiha Fugaku about some information about training Sharingan. When Fugaku knew that this information was to train his youngest son, he naturally didn't hide it. A lot of secret information about the Uchiha clan's Sharingan was revealed by Fugaku. As the head of the Uchiha clan, Fugaku also knew what kind of secrets were recorded in the stone tablet of his family's ancestral hall. Nangongja didn't have the blood of the Uchiha clan, and he wasn't even a person who practiced chakra, so Fugaku was less wary of Nangongja. Although Nangongja lived a stable life in Woodleaf in the past 3 years, Danzo, as the leader of Root, didn't find trouble with Danzo. Occasionally, Nangongja would help the Hokage clan solve some difficult problems, and he got along well with Watergate and the 3 generations. Although Nangongja was a little surprised that Woodleaf didn't take any action against Akatsuki, these were some of Woodleaf's internal affairs after all. Nangongja was too lazy to care about them. The one who was really threatened by Akatsuki wasn't him, so why should he worry about wood leaf? Well, today's training is over. You are not only a person who practices swordsmanship, but also a ninja. Ninja's ninjutsu is an advantage that can't be easily given up. You don't have the qualifications to practice internal force, so you can't practice sword chi that is most compatible with swordsmanship. So chakra is your most reliable means, and I'm also looking forward to whether you can combine chakra and swordsmanship in a more interesting way. Nangongja smiled, walked to the side of Sasuke and gently stroked his hand on Sasuke's head. After such a long time, Sasuke didn't have the usual vigilance and distrust towards Nangongja. Time reveals a person's heart. When Nangongja taught him, Sasuke's heart was clear about the care and attention that Nangongja gave him. Although he still wanted to make himself stronger, to stand in front of his brother and let him tell him the truth about the Uchiha clan's extermination, Sasuke was calmer. Practicing swordsmanship itself was a kind of sharpening of the body and spirit of the practitioner, letting a person slowly fade away some of the anxiety and uneasiness in his heart. Although he was still very firm in his pursuit, it was difficult to be affected by external things, and he faced everything calmly. Although Nangongja never analyzed the details of the Uchiha clan's extermination with Sasuke, Sasuke also analyzed some of the details brought by himself. The Uchiha clan was able to suppress Woodleaf Village. Naturally, they had their own strength advantage. Uchiha Itachi is indeed one of the strongest in the Uchiha clan, but that's all he's capable of. With such strength, it is too absurd to think that they can destroy a powerful clan like the Uchiha clan in such a short period of time. Perhaps Itachi used some shady means to destroy the Uchiha clan, but there are still many other things that he didn't do. Sasuke felt that the truth he had been diligently seeking was about to be placed in front of him. Whether it was Itachi who destroyed the Uchiha clan or not, as long as he could confront Itachi and hear more information about how Itachi destroyed the Uchiha clan, he could naturally get the answer he wanted to know. The more he said, the more loopholes would be exposed. His brother, the person who doted on him so much since childhood, the more Sasuke thought about it, the more he felt that everything was not so simple. In the matter of the Uchiha clan's destruction, it was likely that there were more hidden inside stories. If it was really Itachi who destroyed the Uchiha clan, then he would definitely let his brother pay the price he should pay. But if his brother did such a thing under any unavoidable coercion, or was forced to carry such a black pot, Sasuke would certainly not let the person behind the scenes have an easy time. 3 years of teaching from Nangongja made Sasuke no longer a naive and easily deceived child. Instead, he became a more rational person. No one really knew whether this rationality was floating on the surface or really deeply engraved in Sasuke's heart. Chapter 223. Looking at Sasuke's departing figure, Nangongja suddenly felt that although he didn't directly do anything far-reaching in the past 3 years, however, he had quietly sharpened a sharp blade for this world that was like stagnant water but had always been surging with undercurrents. Once the sharp blade reveals its sharpness, perhaps the entire ninja world will be shaken by such a sharp blade. Nangongja slowly closed the door of his house, and the courtyard that was originally a bit messy because of the battle between the two fell into the silence of the past for a while. Nangongja gently rolled up his sleeves and took out a slightly large broom from behind the door. He took it and slowly cleaned his courtyard. When Nangongja was wholeheartedly cleaning his messy courtyard, a person wearing a blue robe with his face covered appeared behind Nangongja. Greetings, head. The person who came was naturally the disciple of the Blood Cloth Pavilion's Azure Fan Temple. When Nangongja began to settle down in the Woodleaf, Azure Fan always reported some important information to Nangongja from time to time. For some reason, Azure Fan can be said to be the one who recognized Nangongja the most among the 5 altar lords of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Azure Fan simply supported Nangongja to control the Blood Cloth Pavilion without any reservation, although Azure Fan still had some secrets of his own. But Nangongja knew that if the water was too clear, there would be no fish, and if people were too observant, there would be no disciples, so Nangongja didn't care so much about Azure Fan, he had his own plans. Nangongja was still cleaning his courtyard with the huge broom in his hand, and didn't look at the disciple of Azure Fan Temple who was kneeling behind him. This disciple seemed to know Nangongja's temperament, so he stood up and said to Nangongja, "Kuroto-sama, during this period of time, the shinobi world has been relatively stable. Almost nothing of particular importance has happened. Every shinobi village is holding back to develop their own strength. However, the Akatsuki that you specifically asked us to monitor has recently changed their personnel. Although we can't go deep into the Amigakure to investigate the detailed information, we can be sure that the Amigakure is constantly gathering their strength. It seems that there is something big going on." From the moment Nangongzhi arrived at the Woodleaf village, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion began to contact Nangongzhi. The first order given by Nangongzhi was to monitor Amigakure and Akatsuki in it. After all, although he didn't really see the leader of Akatsuki, Nagato, Konan and Haiden left a deep impression on him. He had helped Konan to capture Deidara. Presumably he had already joined Akatsuki under Konan's means. Itachi Uchiha also seemed to be under surveillance to a certain extent, as the information he sent to him was getting fewer and fewer. Nangongzhi boldly speculated that perhaps some of Akatsuki's accumulation has basically been completed. They are just waiting for an opportunity to change from a dormant state into a colorful tiger with fangs and stir up the shinobi world. Clearwater Altar also attached great importance to Nangongzhi's orders. They sent more than one wave of spies to quietly sneak into the Amigakure to inquire about the information, but almost none of the infiltration operations were successful. Fortunately, the disciples of Clearwater Altar were all experts in hiding. When they found out that their infiltration operation failed, they quickly retreated, and the Akatsuki didn't dig out their own traces. Therefore, the disciples of Clearwater Altar could only retreat and lurk in the towns relatively close to the Amigakure and some of the roads that must be passed through. They used some scattered information about the Amigakure to infer the actions of the Amigakure. When the professionals of Clearwater Altar inferred the abnormal personnel transfer of the Amigakure, they immediately came to Nangongzhi to inform Nangongzhi of the information. Nangongzhi's sweeping action also suddenly stopped, but then he still very casually used the broom in his hand to sweep the courtyard. The Akatsuki's movements? As an organization with a huge goal, every action will not be without reason. Since they had taken action again after a long period of silence, they naturally had something to ask of him. With the power of the Akatsuki, what else can they covet? Is it a huge amount of wealth or some precious resources in the shinobi world? No, if these things really appeared as one of the 5 great shinobi villages, Woodleaf Village will not do nothing. This proves that the Akatsuki is plotting something that only they know, and the impact is not that big, but it is very necessary for them. The country of Rain was a small country that was sandwiched between 3 big countries. What did they lack? They don't care about the population. For a shinobi village and an organization, the population represents more people who may be able to form a fighting force. It is not known by most people in the shinobi world, but it has a number of people or fighting force that even the Akatsuki is envious of. The Akatsuki's appetite is really not small. Doing such a thing, they are not afraid of breaking their teeth and even exposing themselves to the shinobi world. Nangongzhi looked at the courtyard that was almost cleaned by him, and handed the broom in his hand to the disciple of Clearwater Altar standing behind him. The disciple of Clearwater Altar also understood and put the broom back behind the door. Walking towards the house, Nangongzhi took out a piece of paper and a brush full of ink from his study room. Gently writing a few words on the paper, Nangongzhi folded the paper a few times and handed it to the disciple of Clearwater Altar. If there is no accident, the goal of the Akatsuki is on this paper. After you go back, give this letter to Clearwater as soon as possible. After Clearwater sees this letter, he will naturally know how to deal with the next matter. Things have really become interesting. This is also a rare opportunity for me. I have to make good use of it. Yes. Although the disciple of Clearwater Altar was somewhat strange about Nangongzhi's reaction, and why was he so sure about his speculation? But as a disciple of Clearwater Altar, completing all the tasks assigned to him is the most important thing. The disciple of Clearwater Altar quickly hid his figure, and left the courtyard of Nangongzhi's house, and returned to the small stronghold of Clearwater Altar in the Woodleaf. Soon, the letter written by Nangongzhi was already in the hands of the master of Clearwater Altar, namely Clearwater. Bai Shui coldly glanced at the urgent letter from Nangongzhi in his hand, then casually threw the letter into a burning furnace beside him. Worthy of being the person I chose, to be able to see through these things, he is more witty than those idiots. Since there is such a rare opportunity, if I don't grasp it well, wouldn't it be a pity? Chapter 224. In the meeting room of the Bloodcloth Pavilion, the 5 altar lords, who were the symbols of the Bloodcloth Pavilion's power center, were sitting quietly in front of their respective seats. Originally, there were 6 chairs here and one of them was placed on the main seat. However, Nangongzhi had been in the Woodleaf Pavilion for 3 years. Unknowingly, the chair that belonged to Nangongzhi had been quietly taken away. Bai Shui, why did you call all of us here in such a hurry? Do you have something important to tell us? Our Scarlet Flame altar has a lot of things to do recently. Don't drag me here just because of some insignificant matter. Seeing that the 5 altar masters had all arrived, Scarlet Flame said to Bai Shui Ru impatiently. As the 5 altar lords of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, they all had their own missions. Unless it was something important, they would not have time to gather together. That's natural. Bai Shui was very clear about Scarlet Flame's character. Normally he would have taught this brute a lesson, but Bai Shui didn't do so. This kind of behavior caused the other altar masters to raise their spirits. This was because Bai Shui's behavior was indeed different from his usual self. The Jade Water Altar itself was the intelligence department of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. They were the eyes and ears of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. A lot of important information had to be passed through the Jade Water Altar's intelligence system. Only then would the other altar lords know about it. Seeing that everyone had quieted down, Bai Shui nodded secretly. She cleared her throat and distributed the stack of information next to her to the other altar lords. This is the information that our Jade Water Altar has recently collected. Everyone take a look carefully. The few altar masters also opened up the documents in front of them very seriously. They were like primary school students who were reading very seriously, almost word by word as they slowly read through the documents. In the entire meeting room, aside from the sound of everyone's breathing, there was only the sound of paper being flipped. After a while, the altar lords carefully read the information that was not too thick. I say, Bai Shui, why do you take that brat's words so seriously? Isn't he just a nominal altar lord? He actually gave such a direct order to the Blood Cloth Pavilion. This brat thinks. Scarlet Flame said impatiently as he casually tossed the information in his hand onto the table. Nangongja was just a figurehead in the Blood Garment Pavilion. The management of the Blood Garment Pavilion could not interfere at all. Fortunately, this kid was quite tactful and hid in Konoha for the past 3 years. Otherwise, he didn't know what kind of person he would be after being bullied by some people in the Blood Cloak Pavilion. But he didn't expect this guy to be so restless even in Woodleaf Village. He even dared to directly order Clearwater Altar to monitor Amagakure's actions. Although the Blood Cloak Pavilion didn't care about the reason for their hostility with the Rain Village, directly inquiring about other people's information was just asking for trouble. Scarlet Flame wasn't someone who liked to use his brain, but Nangongja's order made Scarlet Flame feel that Nangongja was being too childish. Look at this information. It was all records of Amagakure's ninja's movements. It was worthless at all. Such information was collected by Clearwater Altar with a lot of resources. Isn't this too much of a loss? But as Scarlet Flame was talking, Aoki glared at him fiercely. Scarlet Flame could only swallow his words. After all, Aoki's qualifications were worthy of everyone's respect. Scarlet Flame. Enough. Since Nangongja passed the Dragon Transformation Road, then he is the rightful altar lord of our Blood Garment Pavilion. This kind of matter isn't for a junior like you to butt in. Do what you need to do and don't say such useless words. As he spoke, Qingmu turned his gaze towards Bai Shui. Bai Shui, you can continue. What's wrong with this information that requires all of us to gather together? Clearwater nodded after hearing Aoki's words. She glanced at Scarlet Flame and continued. Presumably you have carefully read the information in front of you. Most of them are records of Amagakure's personnel movements when Clearwater Altar was monitoring the Amagakure. The personnel movements before 3 months ago were some very ordinary records. Clearwater Altar directly removed these things. The information in front of you is all records of the Amagakure's personnel movements in the past 3 months. We obviously found something wrong with it. By comparing the number of people leaving the village and the number of people entering the village, we found that there is a huge difference between them. Just from our records, we can find that there are nearly 2,000 ninjas gathering outside the Amagakure. Even the 5 great ninja villages, as the biggest forces in the ninja world, would be very difficult for them to take out nearly 2,000 ninjas at once. But the Amagakure quietly put such a huge force in the ninja world. I think we should be vigilant against such behavior. When our first seat received this information, he also reminded us to pay more attention to it. After all, the actual ruler of the Amagakure is the Akatsuki. In the previous operation, the Akatsuki showed part of their power in front of our altar lord. They already have the strength to compete with us or even stronger than us. In fact, there are only a few forces that can make the Akatsuki gather such a huge force to fight against. The possibility of them using force against the 5 great ninja villages can be said to be very small, so we must be prepared. 2,000 ninjas. Those are ninjas, not ordinary soldiers. When such a force came out from Clearwater's mouth, the faces of several altar lords who were sitting in their seats changed. If such a force really attacked the Blood Robe Pavilion, would the Blood Robe Pavilion, whose strength was scattered, be able to withstand such a force? A big question mark appeared in everyone's heart. What we need now is to gather as much strength as possible for a rainy day. Finally, Clearwater made the final conclusion. Clearwater believes that it is necessary to gather all the forces that the Bloodrobe Pavilion can gather to face the threat from the Akatsuki. Chapter 225. When Bai Shui's words came out, the complexion of the other altar lords of Bloodcloth Pavilion, who hadn't been moved by Akatsuki's actions, immediately changed. Isn't this a bit too much? Hutu, who had always been simple and honest, was the first to speak. The strength of our Bloodcloth Pavilion is indeed very scattered, but that's because we have our own mission. We all need to obtain enough resources to maintain the existence of Bloodcloth Pavilion, money and other necessities, so we are scattered all over the ninja world. Now, because of some assumptions, we have to directly give up our operations all over the world. Isn't this a bit too much? The maintenance of an organization has never been a simple matter, and most of the manpower of Bloodcloth Pavilion is also scattered in some important resources and industries. Once these people are recalled, it means that they have to give up some of their own industries. Even if it's only a temporary suspension of operations, the loss caused by it is immeasurable, and no matter what, once they fall behind by a step, it won't be easy to catch up again. Moreover, the 5 altar lords were leading their own subaltars, and each of them had their own plans. If they really recalled their own personnel according to Bai Shui's suggestion, it will have a huge impact on each subaltar. On the contrary, Bai Shui altar itself obtains resources through intelligence and assassination, so it won't be affected that much. Not being stingy with using the darkest thoughts to speculate on everyone's words and suggestions was a trait that every superior should possess, wasn't it? Indeed, this is somewhat making a fuss over a minor issue. After hearing Hutu's words, Rui-jin also voiced his opinion. Even old man Aoki slowly nodded his head, and seemed to think that the words of Rui-jin and Hutu were actually very reasonable. I think that Brad is harboring evil intentions. He wants to use such news to shrink or even reduce the strength in our hands, so that he can rightfully sit on his position as the head of the table. Seeing that all of them didn't agree with Bai Shui's proposal, for a while, Nangongja seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and he splashed dirty water on Nangongja. However, a chill suddenly engulfed Scarlet Flame's entire body. Jade Water was currently looking at him with a slight smile. Her smile was like a flower, but her eyes were frighteningly cold. Scarlet Flame could only smile awkwardly and quickly shut his mouth. If he continued to shoot his mouth off like this, he was afraid that he would not be able to keep his life. It might feel good to talk big, but wasn't it more important to stay alive? Placing the documents in his hands on the table in the conference room, Bai Shui paused for a moment to tidy up the papers. He looked at the altar masters of the Blood Garment Pavilion, but his heart was filled with disappointment. Qi Yen was reckless, Ho Tu was stingy, Qing Mu Shouqing and Rui Jin were short-sighted. Could such an organization, such a group of leaders, really allow the Blood Garment Pavilion to continue? The Blood Garment Pavilion had reached a point where they had no choice but to change. However, the thoughts of this group of people were still unable to change. The Blood Garment Pavilion really needed a person with foresight, wisdom and means to lead it. Since everyone has already made a decision, then I'm sure that no matter what I say, you won't necessarily listen. Everyone placed the interests of the blood-clad pavilion above the balance and made their own decisions. I have nothing to say. I only hope that everyone will remember their own choices. In the future, all the consequences will be your own. Everyone, please take care of yourselves. This is the Blood Garment Pavilion, not Qi Yen Pavilion, Rui Jin Pavilion, Qing Mu Pavilion, or Ho Tu Pavilion. We are an organization, not a loose alliance. It was clear that Bai Shui was truly enraged by everyone's attitude. Thus, he directly spat out such heart-wrenching words. Bai Shui, you... Qing Mu opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something to Bai Shui. However, just as he reached out his hand, Bai Shui directly walked to the door and slammed it shut. In fact, Bai Shui's heart was not that ruthless. If he really wanted to push Nangongja to the top, there was no need to reveal this information to the 5 altar masters. Even if he really wanted to reveal this information, he could have just skipped over it. There was no need to be so angry. However, Bai Shui still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. He hoped that he could preserve more of the Blood Garment Pavilion's strength through his own efforts. This was also the fundamental reason why the Jade Water Society had such a huge outburst from their usual calm and unperturbed attitude. He deeply loved the Blood Garment Pavilion. This place was like a pure land for Bai Shui. Bai Shui only hoped that there would never be any war to burn this place. But the threat of Akatsuki organization was so close. but no one was willing to open their eyes and clearly recognize the gap between them and other forces. Bai Shui had completely given up the last glimmer of hope in his heart. Since this was the case, let the enemy come. Use the swords in their hands, and use the blood and lives of countless disciples of Blood Garment Pavilion to wake up these people who were deceiving themselves. As he strode forward, Bai Shui's aquamarine robes fluttered in the wind as he walked. There was an unusual beauty in the coldness. How are the preparations? Konan was wearing the Akatsuki organization's signature black robe with red clouds. Her cold voice resounded, and she said to the person in front of her. The ninja of Akatsuki organization who was half kneeling in front of Konan cupped his hands and said, "Our forces have been assembled and we can act at any time." According to our information from Woodleaf, Nangongzhe is still in Woodleaf. It seems that Blood Garment Pavilion is not aware of our actions. Hearing the report of Akatsuki organization's ninja, Konan couldn't help but chuckle twice, as if she had heard something particularly funny. Don't know? How is that possible? A group of self-deceiving people, obviously the truth is in front of them, but they are not willing to accept it. Letting such a group of people lead such a huge force like Blood Garment Pavilion is really a waste. Since they don't know how to cherish it, then we will spare no effort to help them so that these forces can really play their role. Konan said, then turned around and walked away. However, in the jungle behind Konan, there are many hidden places for ninjas to rest. Roughly counting, there were more than 400 or 500 of them. Chapter 226. Hey, did you hear? A few days ago, the Altar Lord hosted an Altar Lord meeting. In the end, those Altar Lords somehow offended the Altar Lord. For the past few days, the Altar Lord has been cooped up in her room and hasn't come out at all. Even when Altar Lord Qing Mu went to console the Altar Lord didn't open the door. 2 guards were chatting at the entrance of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Guarding the entrance was extremely boring. Moreover, this was the entrance of a hidden faction like the Blood Garment Pavilion. Normally no one would come to visit. Among all the jobs that the Blood Garment Pavilion's disciples were responsible for, guarding the entrance was perhaps the most relaxing and boring job. When people had nothing to do, they would start gossiping about things that were out of their reach. As the Altar Lord of the Blood Garment Pavilion's Jade Water Altar, Bai Shui was one of the 5 core members of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Naturally, it was difficult for people to avoid gossiping about her. I've also heard that the Altar Lord has always been known to have a bad temper. However, as long as someone gives the Altar Lord a way out after she loses her temper, she'll usually be fine. I don't know what happened this time to make the Altar Lord so stubborn. Could it be? Before he could finish speaking, a slightly wretched smile appeared on the guard's face. This kind of expression that all men understood made the other guard understand and laugh together. When the 2 of them were immersed in their own fantasies, the sound of shoes stepping on the ground quietly sounded behind the 2 of them. Bai Shui wore aqua-green clothes and held a cyan whip in her hand. At this moment, she was smiling at the 2 guards who were gossiping about her. Sensing the indescribable cold feeling behind them, the 2 guards stiffly turned around and saw Bai Shui standing behind them. She was their highest leader. She had actually heard them gossiping about her behind her back. This. The 2 guards trembled under Bai Shui's smiling gaze. They half knelt on the ground and trembled as they said, "Greetings, Altar Lord Bai Shui." Haha. Hearing the greetings of the 2 guards, Bai Shui chuckled lightly, like a peony blossoming, brightening up half the world. If it was any other time, the 2 guards would have bragged to others after seeing such clear water. But now the 2 could only tremble like quails. Didn't you guys laugh so happily whenever you mention me? Why are the 2 of you so scared when I'm smiling? Keep laughing, it's quite fun when you guys laugh. One of the guards looked at the other guard beside him and gave him a look as if to say, "You started this topic, so you should solve it." The other guard's expression also changed. However, he was the one who was in the wrong in this matter. After glancing at Bai Shui's expression, he could only brace himself and speak. "Altar Master, you must be joking. The 2 of us didn't know the gravity of the situation. Because the job of guarding the door was really boring, we offended you while we were chatting. Please forgive us, Altar Master." The guard seemed to have some knowledge and spoke in a very organized manner. "Look, I've already apologized so seriously and explained the cause and effect of the matter to you clearly. As an Altar Master, you should still want to save face, right? Since there's a way out, then let's go down properly. This is the entrance of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Once there's trouble, the 2 of us are just insignificant disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Bai Shui is the Altar Master of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. At that time, who knows who will be the one to lose face? The guard felt that he was too smart. It was a pity that there was no one in the blood clothing pavilion who knew how to judge people. Otherwise, he would have already made a name for himself. Why would he need to be a miserable gatekeeper and welcome disciple? While the guard was still admiring himself, Bai Shui's face became gloomy. She was already in a bad mood after being rebuffed by the other 4 altar masters of the bloodcloth pavilion. She was also very disappointed in the leaders of the bloodcloth pavilion. Now that she was at the entrance, a gatekeeper disciple of the lowest level actually dared to play tricks on her? The upper echelons were stupid, but the lower echelons were very complacent and full of petty tricks. This bloodcloth pavilion was really interesting. She had lived in the bloodcloth pavilion for so many years, but she had not seen such things. It was really a dereliction of her duty. I asked you to laugh. Why are you explaining to me? Bai Shui's slightly cold words rushed into the gatekeeper disciple's ears. It's over. She had flattered the wrong horse. Not only did it not make Bai Shui feel better, but it also put her in an even more dangerous situation. There was no other way. Since Bai Shui asked them to laugh, they naturally had to laugh. Ha! That kind of hoarse, forcibly stifled laughter came out of the 2 people's mouths. Bai Shui was very upset when he heard this. This was the bloodcloth pavilion. Originally, Bai Shui wanted to properly discipline these 2 gatekeepers who did not know the severity of the matter. However, at this moment she was not in the mood to do so. People often said that when a person was disappointed, they would not be willing to try anything. Perhaps Bai Shui's current mood towards the bloodcloth pavilion was like this? It gently waved its sleeves, and the aqua-green sleeves fluttered in the air with the force of the water. It was as ethereal as the clouds in the sky. If its owner could have such a mood like it, it would be great. The conflict at the entrance quickly reached the ears of the 4 altar masters of the blood garment pavilion. When Qi Yin heard this, he only felt a burst of fear. At that time, if he had not stood on the side with the advantage in numbers, perhaps he would have been properly disciplined by Bai Shui. When Ho Tu heard this, he only scratched his head. The 2 gatekeepers were the ones who had been rude first. In that case, it was fine for Bai Shui to teach them a lesson. After all, they did not cause any harm. When Aoki heard this, he gently placed an old book in his hand on the table in front of him. He sighed slightly and didn't say anything. When Rue Jin heard this, he did not react at all. He still minded his own business and wiped the long sword in his hand. It was as if the long sword was the only thing he should pay attention to. Chapter 227. Bai Shui maintained a look of anger as he walked into his room. However, the moment Bai Shui entered the room, all the anger on his face disappeared. It was as if the anger had never existed in the first place. How is it? A man's voice came from Bai Shui's room. Nangong's figure came out from behind a screen, and said to Bai Shui with a bit of ridicule. That's right, Nangongja was actually in the headquarters of Bloodcloth Pavilion at this moment. When Nangongja came to know that Akatsuki organization was most likely going to attack Bloodrobe Pavilion, he had already entered Bloodrobe Pavilion through Clearwater Altar. Everyone knew Nangongja's temperament and natural disposition. He had always disliked things like ninjutsu, so many people subconsciously ignored the possibility of Nangongja being impersonated in Woodleaf. Nangongja took advantage of such a big blind spot, and made Nangong Ro temporarily come out from Lion Clan's different space and enter Woodleaf. Nangong Ro could use ninjutsu, not to mention transformation jutsu, this kind of low-level ninjutsu. She could easily use it. Nangongja and Nangong Ro had lived together for so many years, so they knew each other's small habits and small movements very well. Making Nangong Ro dress up as Nangongja to confuse other people's line of sight was really not difficult. This simple trick of stealing the sky and swapping the sun actually deceived everyone. This was very interesting. Bai Shui shook her head and said with a bit of disappointment, "It's still the same. Still the same." The people of the Blood Garment Pavilion all closed their eyes and ears, unwilling to accept the fact that they had become the prey of others. They are still minding their own business and playing very happily. They didn't take my warning to heart. Even though I've been deliberately throwing tantrums these past 2 days and finding fault with them from time to time, the people of Blood Garment Pavilion still haven't come to their senses. It seems that bloodshed is unavoidable this time. In fact, Nangongja had already guessed the reaction of the blood-robed pavilion. Such a hidden force naturally couldn't be compared to some of the forces in the shinobi world. This long period of peace and stability has obliterated their sense of crisis. Perhaps, if you want them to truly put down their attitude and treat the entire ninja world with an equal attitude, you really need a real sting to do it, right? Then, do you have any guesses about the person who destroyed my home? Nangongzhi asked the question that he had been wanting to ask for a long time. The operation record that Bai Shui gave him clearly stated that the person who led a group of ninjas to exterminate Nangongzhi's village was the Altar Lord of Scarlet Flame Altar, Scarlet Flame. But after observing for so long whether it was Nangongzhi or Bai Shui, they felt that Scarlet Flame wasn't the person who brazenly took action to snatch the Heaven's Disaster Sword. If Scarlet Flame really had such a scheming heart and ambition, then this operation record would not have been recorded so clearly. This was simply leaving behind the biggest weakness for him to use against Scarlet Flame. Therefore, for the past 3 years, Nangongzhi and Bai Shui have been searching inside Bloodcloth Pavilion to find out who instigated Scarlet Flame to do such a crazy act. Although I didn't directly determine the target, it still made me set my eyes on 2 people. The one who can instigate Scarlet Flame must be one of the 5 Altar Lords of Bloodcloth Pavilion. I and Scarlet Flame can be excluded for the time being. Aoki is already very old. Even when the village was massacred, Aoki was already old, so there is no motive for him to take the risk to snatch the Heaven's Disaster Sword at such an age. So only Ho-Tu and Rui-Jin are the most suspicious. These 2 people are very low-key. Even if I have worked with them for many years, I still haven't seen their true faces. Maybe we still have to wait for Bloodcloth Pavilion to be attacked by Akatsuki organization, and see who will reveal the truth? Ho-Tu had always been simple and honest, and Rui-Jin was also extremely low-key outside of battle. They were completely different from Scarlet Flame, so people simply couldn't see the real intention of these 2 people. Nangongzhi had already told Bai Shui before that Akatsuki organization had wanted to win him over. So the one among the 5 Altar Lords who had disloyal intentions would absolutely not let go of such an opportunity. As long as there was a suitable opportunity, he would certainly reveal the truth. This was the time for Nangongzhi to clean up Bloodcloth Pavilion and truly take charge of Bloodcloth Pavilion. Fortunately, Big Sister has always taken care of me. Otherwise, I would really be blind in this blood clothing pavilion. Nangongzhi actually called Bai Shui sister, but it wasn't a big deal. The expression on their faces made people feel that all of this was natural. As we have said before, in Bloodcloth Pavilion, once one inherits the position of Altar Lord, he will change his name, and the name of the Altar Lord will be his own name. Bai Shui was not a native disciple of Bloodcloth Pavilion. There were still many internal energy cultivation inheritances scattered in the ninja world outside Bloodcloth Pavilion. Bai Shui was originally chosen by the previous Altar Lord of Bai Shui Altar because of her talent, and was accepted as a disciple, and then naturally inherited the position of Altar Lord of Bai Shui Altar. Many people did not know that this Altar Lord of Bai Shui Altar of Bloodcloth Pavilion, before inheriting the position of Altar Lord, her surname was Nangong. According to seniority, Bai Shui was the sister of Nangongzhi and Nangong Ro. It's nothing, although you and I are not related by blood. But you have inherited the mantle of the old man, and have been protecting my sister, so you are one of us. There is nothing to hesitate about helping you. I only hope that you can be more outstanding, and make the old man's sacrifice worth it. All the fog had been quietly lifted at this moment. Why was Bai Shui so clear about the matter of Nangongzhi's village being massacred? Why was Bai Shui so active in showing goodwill to Nangongzhi as an Altar Lord when Nangongzhi had just inherited the position of Bloodcloth Pavilion's head? Why was Bai Shui willing to listen to Nangongzhi's orders when the 5 Altar Lords of Bloodcloth Pavilion had decided to make Nangongzhi a mere figurehead? Everything was because Bai Shui and Nangong Ro were blood relatives. When Nangong Ro's grandfather and Nangong Ro were being chased and attacked, Bai Shui did not know, but when she understood the reason, she quietly kept everything in her heart. When Nangongzhi became the head, Bai Shui naturally stood up to support Nangongzhi, who had a deep relationship with her. When the relationship between the two was made clear, they were bound together for good or ill. If Nangongzhi could become stronger and more powerful, it would be of great significance to Bai Shui. Chapter 228. Outside the gate of the blood-robed pavilion, there was a huge forest. The huge forest was the best defensive place for the blood-robed pavilion. For generations, the blood-robed pavilion had actively arranged various lines of defense and defensive facilities in the forest, and there were many open and hidden sentries. These were all built by the blood-robed pavilion for basic defense, but in recent years the members of the blood-robed pavilion had gradually dispersed, leaving only Aoki Altar and a small number of the other 4-5 elements altars in the headquarters of the blood-robed pavilion. With so many lines of defense and so many sentries, there were not enough people to guard them, resulting in less than 1 out of 10 places that still played a role. And on this day, the few sentries of the blood-robed pavilion were attacked by the enemy. Report. Our personnel have arrived at the designated location. The sentries of the blood-robed pavilion have been monitored by our personnel. A person wearing the uniform of the Akatsuki organization suddenly appeared in the big tent where the Akatsuki organization attacked the blood-robed pavilion. In every war, the first thing to do is to eliminate the eyes and ears of the opponent. The sentries of the blood-robed pavilion in the forest were the eyes and ears of the blood-robed pavilion. When Conan led the members of the Akatsuki organization to the forest in front of the gate of the blood-robed pavilion, she made great efforts to find the sentries of the blood-robed pavilion. This time, Zetsu, Deidara, and Sasori came with Conan to the blood-robed pavilion. Among the three of them, there was an extremely powerful intelligence-gathering ability. Deidara's explosive clay had excellent power in a group battle. Sasori himself was good at puppet jutsu, and his powerful, red secret jutsu, 100 machine manipulation, was extremely powerful. This time, the Akatsuki organization dispatched nearly 2,000 people in order to defeat the blood-robed pavilion in an extremely short period of time and absorb the power of the blood-robed pavilion before all the ninja villages noticed it. Very good. Conan nodded, looked at the sun in the sky, thought for a moment and then said, "Inform all ninjas, get ready, attack the blood-robed pavilion at 2 o'clock in the morning tonight." Yes. The ninjas of the Akatsuki organization responded and then left the tent. Conan also turned her gaze to Sasori and Deidara, who were also standing in the big tent. "Have you understood the intelligence of the main forces of the blood-robed pavilion?" Sasori put down the information in his hand, and Deidara also woke up a little from his lazy state. Naturally. Sasori himself was hidden inside the puppet jutsu, but when he was inside the puppet jutsu, his voice would change and his voice was a little hoarse and low. Blood-robed pavilion's jutsu redness and thick, these 5 elements of the 5 elements altars. Their altar masters used the names of their altars as their names. The sharp gold altar was the combat department of the blood garment pavilion, and it was especially good at surprise attacks. Alor is a master swordsmanship master. Part row pavilion is sword according to the swordsman of the swordsman sword pavilion. The greenwood altar was part of the logistics department of the blood garment pavilion. Most of them were not strong in battle but they were good at medicine. His was master, his master, he was master, he was master, and he was he. The jade water altar was the intelligence department of the blood clothing pavilion and also the assassination department. All the disciples of the jade water altar were experts in stealth and assassination. Aquamarine altar lord was good at using the soft whip technique. The whip was an extremely rare weapon in the ninja world, and the soft whip was even more strange and often impossible to guard against. The Scarlet Flame altar was the combat department of the blood garment pavilion. It was mainly responsible for attacking. Its combat power was astonishing. Moreover, when it fought, there was a strange fanatical atmosphere. As the altar lord of the Scarlet Flame altar, Scarlet Flame's fanaticism had reached its peak. The long saber in his hand was extremely lethal. It was even said that the more injured he was, the more powerful he would become. The thick earth altar was mainly responsible for defense in the blood cloak pavilion. It also served as the vanguard in battles. The strength of the deep earth altar's altar lord wasn't very clear, but to be able to lead such an army he must be very powerful. The thick earth altar's disciples are mostly responsible for the defense of the forest. Scorpion explained the blood-clad pavilion's information. From time to time he would add in some of his own opinions. After saying that, Scorpion couldn't help but sigh. These people are all good materials for making puppets. Unlike ninjas who rely on chakra, the disciples of the blood cloak pavilion were all people who cultivated internal energy. Their bodies were extremely strong. For Scorpion, these disciples of the blood cloak pavilion were indeed the best materials for making his own eternal art. Deidara curled his lips and said with a slight sigh and sarcasm, "This blood cloak pavilion dared to claim to be a hidden force. Just like that, we were able to get a clear picture of him. What a waste. Could it be that we have planted our own people in the blood clothing pavilion to obtain such detailed information?" As soon as Deidara's words came out, Conan and Scorpion turned their eyes to Deidara. That kind of look was clearly as if their idiot suddenly became enlightened and used his brain. They were very pleased. Hey, what's with that look? Although I don't know what you are thinking, it must be something very rude. Don't look at me like that, be careful of this uncle giving you an artistic explosion. Sure enough, his idiot was still an idiot. Only eternity is true art. Explosions like yours are simply unorthodox and unorthodox. Scorpion began to talk about his own artistic views with Deidara. After 3 years of run-in, the relationship between Scorpion and Deidara was still as incompatible as ever. Every time Deidara began to talk about his own explosion art, Scorpion would satirize that Deidara's art was not real art at all. Only his art of making living people into puppets was real art. Scorpion, you bastard. Believe it or not, this uncle will let you have a good taste of the power of this uncle's cute little spider explosion, and let you really understand what art is. You can try. Scorpion's voice was still low and hoarse, making people feel very uncomfortable. Conan also subconsciously pressed her hand on her forehead. It seemed that she also regretted bringing a pair of clowns like Deidara and Scorpion to such an important operation. Chapter 229. In fact, bringing Sasori and Deidara to such an operation was really a helpless move. Not long ago, Itachi and Orochimaru, who didn't see eye to eye with each other, had a fierce fight with each other. After that, no one knew what Orochimaru was thinking. He actually directly took off the uniform of Akatsuki and defected from the organization. This was the first time since the establishment of Akatsuki that a senior member defected from the organization. After this incident, Pain had to leave Akatsuki to pursue Orochimaru, because Orochimaru was responsible for a lot of confidential research tasks of Akatsuki. Such information was naturally taken away by Orochimaru when he left. Such a person must not be easily let go, otherwise where would the dignity of Akatsuki be placed? Therefore Itachi, Uchiha Kisame, and Pain, who were supposed to attack Blood-Clothed Pavilion with Zetsu and Conan, went to chase Orochimaru. But ninjas have been assembled, and such a laborious operation can't be abandoned. Therefore Conan could only take Sasori and Deidara as backup forces to attack Blood-Clothed Pavilion. Of course, Sasori and Deidara were not randomly chosen. Since Akatsuki had the information of Blood-Clothed Pavilion, they have been making plans to annex it. People who practice internal force do have slightly higher combat power than ninjas of the same level, but most of them are straightforward and don't have the ability to attack a group. Therefore, Sasori and Deidara are naturally the best choices as AoE attackers. Not to mention Deidara's aerial combat ability and Sasori's strange puppet manipulation method. Time passed quietly, and in the blink of an eye, it was already the sun setting in the west and the moon rising in the east. The bright moon was hanging in the sky, naturally exuding a slightly cold light. Late at night, a breeze blew through the forest from time to time, bringing the smell of grass into people's nostrils. It wasn't that exciting. Instead, it made people feel especially tired and sleepy. They wanted to sleep to get rid of the tiredness in their bodies. In a secret post of Blood-Clothed Pavilion, there were 4 disciples of Blood-Clothed Pavilion who were responsible for keeping watch at night. Blood-Clothed Pavilion has always been very stable, and no one dares to break in, so the job of keeping watch at night gradually became a means of punishment for disobedient disciples. Among the 4, one of them was quite old. He was the leader of the group when they were on night watch. The older disciple was from the Deep Earth altar of the Blood-Cloaked Pavilion. The other 3 disciples were from different 5 elemental altars. Due to some mistakes, they were punished to be on night watch here. Looking at the youngest disciple of the Blood-Clothing Pavilion, who was nestled in the corner, who looked dizzy and could no longer stay up, the older disciple of the Thick Earth altar smiled. His child was about the same age as this young disciple. Looking at this young disciple, the Deep Earth altar's disciple could not help but think of his wife and child who lived in the Blood Garment Pavilion's headquarters. As for the remaining 2 Blood Garment Pavilion disciples, they were squatting together and playing some card game. Occasionally, one of them would be very excited after winning, while the one who lost would be very unwilling to give up and would clamor for another round. The night, especially in such a quiet forest, was always very long. Even the Deep Earth altar's night watcher couldn't take it anymore. He gently closed his eyes, intending to take a nap for a while. Accompanied by the noise of the 2 Blood-Cloaked Pavilion disciples, the older disciple of the Deep Earth altar slowly fell asleep. He faintly seemed to have heard something wrong, but he was still defeated by tiredness. But the neck of the older disciple was very cold. It seemed that some liquid was constantly seeping out from the side of his neck. His body temperature continued to drop along with the flow of the liquid. Finally, the life of the older disciple quietly passed away. However, there was a peaceful look on his face, as if he had lost his life in a beautiful dream. The originally warm hidden sentry post had become very bloody with the loss of 4 lives. The blood all over the ground seemed to prove that these 4 lives had left a little mark in this world. The people of Akatsuki organization were standing outside the door of the hidden sentry post. Their leader gently lifted a paper crane in his hand, then injected a little chakra into the paper crane to activate the transcribed technique. After that, the paper crane slowly flew towards the big tent of Akatsuki organization. Looking back at the house of the hidden sentry post, he very contemptuously said, "Such an organization, such a group of people, we actually need to mobilize so much power to subdue them. If you ask me, it would be better to let all of our senior members come to the entrance of this blood robe pavilion, and let out their imposing manner, then this group of blood robe pavilion soft feet shrimps might directly kowtow, and cry and shout to join our Akatsuki organization." After hearing such words, other people of Akatsuki organization also laughed. Originally, they all thought that this blood cloak pavilion must be the strongest enemy they had ever encountered. But when they attacked the hidden sentry post tonight, they discovered that the quality of these blood cloak pavilion people was really bad. As the night watchmen, they actually didn't have any vigilance, 2 people slept and 2 people played. The ninjas of Akatsuki organization quietly blew some hypnotic smoke into the small house of the hidden sentry post, and this group of people also directly fell into the trap. The funny thing was that the person who seemed to be the leader of these 4 people actually didn't react at all, and was directly killed by them. That happy smile on his face was simply the funniest thing that these ninjas of Akatsuki organization had ever seen after becoming ninjas. Many paper cranes flew towards the big tent of Akatsuki organization, and were received by the ninjas of Akatsuki organization who were responsible for collecting information. From time to time, the person who reported the information opened his mouth and talked about the progress of the operation. Left sector cleared completely. Right sector cleared completely. Front sector cleared completely. Rear sector cleared completely. A ninja of Akatsuki organization arrived in front of Conan, then cupped his hands and said to Conan, "Report, our elimination plan has been carried out smoothly. All the hidden sentry posts in the 4 sectors have been completely eliminated, and so far no flaw has been found." Xiaonan smiled faintly. She didn't find any flaws. What a pleasant surprise. Chapter 230. The plan is always an idealized way of thinking because everything is changing, all the elements that you have calculated are always changing. No matter how perfect your plan is, it will be difficult to avoid some omissions. Just like now, Akatsuki organization was carrying out the plan to clean up all the hidden sentries of Blood-Clothed Pavilion. If 1 or 2 hidden sentries were not successfully eliminated, or if 1 or 2 disciples of Blood-Clothed Pavilion escaped from the hidden sentries, it was completely within Conan's acceptable range, but now everything was going smoothly, which made Conan feel very wrong. However, after taking a closer look at the personnel arrangement of each sentry post and the number of beheaded heads reported by each squad, there was not a single flaw. Conan could only gently support her forehead with her hand. Don't know if the quality of Akatsuki organization's people is very high or because the quality of Blood-Cloth Pavilion's people is pitifully low, unexpectedly this kind of strange situation can appear. But Conan still extricated herself from such strange thoughts, because now she was in the middle of the battlefield. Everything is changing rapidly, since her side has grasped such a big advantage, then naturally she can't easily let it go. He waved his sleeves and expelled all the messy thoughts from his mind. Conan's face was cold, and her temperament was like that of an ice queen, as she lightly opened her red lips. Inform Jade Maiden and Azure Dragon the plan is advanced. Now take your subordinates to the headquarters of Blood-Cloth Pavilion, and begin to slowly nibble away at Blood-Cloth Pavilion. From outside to inside, slowly wear down the strength of Blood-Cloth Pavilion, try not to expose your existence. If you are exposed, it doesn't matter, I will always be in the rear. Conan very calmly gave the order, but then she turned her eyes and said to the ninja who gave the order, "Especially tell Jade Maiden to keep a close watch on Azure Dragon, don't let him casually use his explosive clay, the impact is really too big. After our side is exposed, then allow Azure Dragon to fully use his explosive clay." Azure Dragon was Daidara's code name, and Jade Maiden was Sasori's code name. In such an official operation, she still had to call each member by their code name. Conan's impression of Daidara was really not so good, so she can't let Daidara directly use his art, in a moment of hot-bloodedness. That will make things more complicated, so Conan told her people to let Sasori keep a close watch on Daidara. Conan's order was also quickly conveyed to Daidara and Sasori, who have been preparing for war. Although the 2 of them were a little puzzled about the advance implementation of the plan, since the order has been issued, then naturally they will comply with it. Although Deidara and Sasori are nominally the commanders of the battle, but in fact both of them are pure ninjas. In such a large-scale battle, they really don't have any talent for commanding the battle, so in fact, there are specialized people in charge of commanding the combat ninjas of Akatsuki organization, and Deidara and Sasori are more like people who assist from the side. Deidara's of blood of his hands, hands of Deidara's of his hands, and white explosive clays of his hands of blood of his hands, palms of his mouth. After a while, the clay has turned into the shape of a giant bird. After Deidara made a few hand seals, chakra continuously poured into the explosive clay to activate the clay giant bird. Sasori. Let's go, let's use facts to prove whose art is more gorgeous and colorful. Deidara seemed to remember Sasori's words of saying that his explosion is not art, so he turned his head and looked at Sasori provocatively. And Sasori's unique low and hoarse voice also said, naive. Deidara was not angry because Deidara felt that he could feel it. Although Sasori's tone was full of disdain, but Sasori was actually excited at the moment. For this battle, Sasori also began to be interested. After all, this is a person who has been doing missions with him for 3 years, so they are still very familiar with each other. Ha ha ha. Deadale laughed as he grabbed Failyohu's tail and placed Scorpion on top of a giant clay bird. You're so cold. To think I was so excited. Looking at Deidara's shameless appearance, Sasori also closed his mouth. If he quarreled with Deidara again, maybe some strange words will come out of this idiot's mouth. Then, fly. When Deidara said this sentence, the clay giant bird under Sasori and Deidara seemed to have received the order and directly flapped its wings and flew up. It was late at night, except for a little bit of moonlight and starlight. It can be said that it was still dark. But in such an environment, when the white clay bird appeared in the sky, it didn't seem abrupt at all. Obviously, Deidara knew that he was going to fight at night, so he used a little trick to make the color of the explosive clay more atomized and not so easy to be noticed. Flying in the air, looking at the ninjas of Akatsuki organization below, they began to gather. Slowly advancing towards the location of the headquarters of Blood Cloak Pavilion, Deidara suddenly felt an indescribable sense of heroism coming out from his heart. He wanted to howl at the sky first. Seeing Deidara's strange look, Sasori also followed Deidara's gaze and looked at his body. Although there was the obstruction of the woods, with Sasori's eyesight, he could easily see the ninjas of Akatsuki organization moving forward in the woods. That kind of crowded scene, that kind of feeling with iron blood and murderous aura, it really makes it difficult for any man to suppress the hot-bloodedness in his heart to participate. But it's a pity. Sasori is not a human. Although he has a human heart as his power core, but because his body was transformed into a puppet, Sasori seems to have unconsciously lost some human characteristics. In the face of many things, Sasori will feel that his emotional fluctuations seem to be a little too thin. This is a good thing for his eternal arc research, Sasori told himself again and again. However, Scorpio couldn't help but bicker with Deadale, who looked a little chinibu and a little silly. Perhaps this is the reason why Sasori subconsciously wants to maintain the attitude of a human? Chapter 231. Most of the disciples of Greenwood Altar were left behind to guard the headquarters of Bloodrobe Pavilion, and only a few disciples of other altars were left behind to guard the headquarters of Bloodrobe Pavilion. Most of these people were too young or too old and didn't have much fighting strength. But this couldn't dispel Akatsuki organization's plan to attack Bloodrobe Pavilion, because now all the altars of Bloodrobe Pavilion were already gathered in the headquarters of Bloodrobe Pavilion. Once Akatsuki organization captured the headquarters of Bloodrobe Pavilion, then it would be equivalent to capturing the entire spiritual belief of Bloodrobe Pavilion. When those disciples of Bloodrobe Pavilion lost their effective command, coupled with the assistance of the people of Bloodrobe Pavilion who supported Akatsuki organization to enter Bloodrobe Pavilion, it wouldn't be difficult to control the entire Bloodrobed Pavilion. A tall Nepenthes plant slowly emerged behind Conan, and Ju's extremely recognizable face was also revealed from the Nepenthes plant. Notify all the members who are planning to attack Bloodrobe Pavilion, start the attack now. Conan glanced at the moon in the sky and judged the current time. Now was the time when most people were sleeping, and even if some people weren't sleeping, their mental state had already fallen to a low point. Once someone invaded, and the speed of invasion was extremely fast, then their reaction speed would be greatly weakened. This was a good opportunity to weaken the strength of Bloodrobe Pavilion, so Conan naturally had to grasp it. Ju, are you sure you don't want to participate in the operation? After issuing the order, Ju was just about to enter the ground again, when Conan couldn't help but ask. As White Tiger, you should know my situation. I am not good at fighting people. I am still responsible for passing on information. Spying on the enemy situation is better. Ju's tone was slightly frivolous, and when it reached the ears of people, it always made people slightly uncomfortable in their heart. It could be said that Ju had joined Akatsuki organization relatively early, but Conan felt as if she had never seen through such a person. That feeling of vigilance and suspicion had never been eliminated in Conan's heart. Is that so? Since you don't want to fight, there's no harm. In any case, the outcome of this war is already decided. Just do your job well. Hearing Ju's refusal, Conan didn't seem to take it to heart. It was as if the proposal just a moment ago was just casually said. Since Ju was unwilling, then there was nothing wrong with it. Hearing Conan's words, the corners of Ju's mouth raised to form a strange smile. If others saw that black face, then maybe because of such a strange smile, it would leave a shadow. The Nepenthes once again integrated into the ground. Obviously, Zetsu had already left to convey Conan's attack order to all the Akatsuki's ninjas who were responsible for the frontline command. The Blood Robe Pavilion's buildings were pavilions. Buildings were in a circle. In the outermost circle's pavilion, the Robe Pavilion's palace, Pavilion's disciples. Pavilion, blood. Relying on the quality of the ninjas of Akatsuki organization, as well as their unintentional actions, Akatsuki organization very quickly and quietly sneaked into the encampment of Bloodcloak Pavilion. Quietly begin. Obviously there was no sound of fighting, but there was still a faint smell of blood spreading all around. Although the 4 altar lords of Bloodrobe Pavilion didn't agree with Bishue's proposal, but such a matter still occupied a certain position in their hearts, so they still maintained the most basic vigilance. Although the smell of blood was very weak, Akatsuki's people were also very careful when they started. But in the end, the loss of life couldn't be easily covered up. Who dares to commit murder in my Bloodrobe Pavilion? A slightly rough voice suddenly resounded in the silent night, and the one who spoke was Scarlet Flame, Altar Lord of Bloodrobe Pavilion. As a person who often faced battles, Scarlet Flame was more sensitive to the smell of blood than others. TSK. Sure enough, we were discovered? But fortunately our results are not small. Hearing Scarlet Flame's roar, Deidara secretly smacked his lips. But soon Deidara's face revealed a fanatical smile. So what if they found out? Sasori has been staring at me, not letting me show off my outstanding art to this group of Bloodrobe Pavilion country bumpkins. Isn't this the right time? Before this, Akatsuki's ninjas had almost destroyed 1/10 of Bloodrobe Pavilion's buildings. Although there weren't many high-level combatants among them, they still had enough battle results. Sure enough, the battle should be more intense. Quietly wiping out all the enemies like this is really not my way of doing things. I want to perfectly show this group of Bloodrobe Pavilion country bumpkins my art. On Deidara's face the smile became more and more crazy. He glanced at Sasori, who was on top of the clay giant bird next to him, but found that Sasori had already jumped down from the clay giant bird without him knowing. At this moment, Sasori was constantly falling from mid-air. He didn't know when Sasori had transformed a part of Philyu. From the shoulder blade of Philyu, a pair of wings actually extended. Although it couldn't make Philyu fly in the air, but it greatly reduced the falling speed of Philyu, playing the role of a parachute. Sasori, this guy actually sneaked away. Seeing that Sasori had secretly jumped down from the clay giant bird, Deidara felt that he couldn't do nothing. He put his hand into the cloth bag on his waist, and the explosive clay in the cloth bag was constantly swallowed by the mouth in his palm. Sensing the mouth in his palm, he estimated that the explosive clay was almost ready. Deidara opened his hands and stretched them in front of his body. The mouth in his palm constantly spat out small birds made of explosive clay. After each small bird was spat out by the mouth, it continued to fly forward. The clay giant bird that Sasori had been sitting on was like a leader, leading countless small birds to the battlefield below. Chi Yan's roar caused the countless disciples of the Blood Clothing Pavilion to react, and the situation on the battlefield gradually became more and more anxious. Small birds continued to fly into the crowd, and the sound of explosions was endless. Chapter 232. Oh! Who dares to invade my blood-robed pavilion? Aoki was also awakened by the sounds of battle outside his door. He hadn't experienced such a large-scale battle for a long time. Most of the people in the headquarters of Blood-Robed Pavilion were disciples of Aoki Altar, and he had watched them grow up. Aoki looked at his nephews lying in a pool of blood one by one, and his sad voice resounded through the 9 heavens. You people, I will let you see the power of blood-robed pavilion. Holding a huge dragon-head wooden staff in his hand, Aoki also joined the battle. Although the strength of Akatsuki's people was pretty good, but they were still a bit lacking when facing Aoki. Occasionally, Aoki glanced at other places and saw Ruijin, Hotu, and Akatsuki were resisting the sudden attack of powerful enemies. Sure enough, was what Bisui said true? Akatsuki really gathered 2,000 ninjas to attack blood-robed pavilion. Although the number of people in blood-robed pavilion was not less than 2,000, but Aoki was very clear about how many of them were old, weak, sick, and disabled. Even most of the young and middle-aged people in Aoki altar were not very proficient in fighting. Could such a battle really go on? When Aoki was still asking himself, a dark green poisonous needle quietly shot towards Aoki. There was no time to think so much. Since the battle had already begun, it was useless to be upset, so he had to face the enemy properly. Aoki waved his dragon-head wooden staff, and the poisonous needle directly fell to the ground. Looking in the direction where the poison needle came from, a bloated person wearing a red cloud on a black background was standing there. A huge scroll was placed in front of Scorpion. Scorpion, who was hiding in Filiu, made a hand seal and released the puppets he had sealed in the scroll. A rough count revealed that there were over 100 of these puppets. Strands of chakra condensed into chakra threads connected to each of the puppets, and one by one, the puppets began to attack the people near Sasori with their sharp weapons all over their body. Puppeteer? Qingmu was very old and could be considered to be very knowledgeable. Although there weren't many puppeteers in Sunagakure, Aoki had seen some of them. An ordinary puppeteer could control 3 or 4 puppets at the same time, and that was already not bad. However, the puppet master in front of him was able to control hundreds of puppets with ease as if they were his own limbs. Such a person. A piece of information kept flashing in Aoki's mind. Such a person could only be the genius puppeteer who betrayed the Sand Ninja, Sasori of the Red Sand, who had such strength. That's right, this was the Crimson Secret technique that the Scorpion of the Crimson Sand had once used to wipe out an entire country, the 100 Machine Demonstration. Seeing one life after another being taken away by the puppets before his eyes, Greenwood's grip on his dragon-headed wooden staff tightened. The inner strength in his body surged, and with a shake of his ankle, he shot towards the Red Sand Scorpion like an arrow. Sasori obviously didn't expect that Aoki's old and decayed body could burst out such a powerful force in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Aoki was already in front of Sasori. He raised his dragon-headed wooden staff high and smashed it with great force towards Sasori. Sasori hurriedly controlled Hiryu to use his tail to block the attack. The moment the dragon-headed wooden staff and the tail collided, the sound of metal and stone colliding was heard. Sasori didn't know what material the tail was made of, but it was extraordinarily strong. However, when the dragon-headed wooden staff and the tail collided, a huge shockwave was generated, and the hat on Sasori's head was blown away. Seeing Hiryu's appearance, Aoki couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Isn't he too ugly? There were only 3 strands of hair on his head, and his body was short and stout. Comparing the information he saw about Sasori, was this person really Sasori of the Crimson Sand? You must be a disciple of Sasori of the Sand Village, right? Sasori wasn't young, so it should be possible for him to accept a disciple, right? After all, Hiryu's appearance and Sasori's appearance were a bit different. The person in front of him could only be described as eyesore. Sasori didn't answer Aoki's question. Instead, he controlled Hiryu to constantly shoot poisonous needles from his body, trying to force Aoki away. Facing the dense poisonous needles, Aoki couldn't resist and could only constantly wave his dragon-headed wooden staff to block the poisonous needles flying towards him. Under Sasori's control, 100 puppets were divided into 2 teams, one of which had 70 puppets surrounding Aoki and constantly attacking him. The remaining 30 puppets were under Sasori's control, either cooperating with Akatsuki's ninjas or attacking the Blood Cloak Pavilion's disciples in pairs. Greenwood, on the other hand, could only barely prevent himself from being attacked by the 70 puppets. He didn't have any more energy to spare. They could only watch helplessly as the disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion were slaughtered one after another. The situation on the side of Akatsuki, Ruijin, and Thick Earth wasn't optimistic. There was a man with long golden hair in the sky constantly throwing some exploding clay birds. These clay birds were constantly attacking the Blood Cloak Pavilion's disciples, and there were also many small birds attacking the Blood Cloak Pavilion's buildings. To be honest, these 3 altar lords didn't have any long-range attack means. They only had internal force but no sword chi, so they couldn't use sword chi to cause long-range damage like Nangongja. One by one they were like firefighters, constantly running in the Blood Cloak Pavilion's front line. Keeping the front line from collapsing was already exhausting. Nangongzhe and Bishui were standing in the Blood Cloak Pavilion's iconic attic at this moment, watching the Blood Cloak Pavilion's disciples being killed one after another. This time, whether we win or lose, the Blood Cloak Pavilion's vitality will be greatly damaged. Nangongzhe couldn't help but slightly sigh, but it was only a slight sigh. Nangongzhe had seen many battlefields that were more intense than this, so he didn't feel particularly sad. It doesn't matter, although the Blood Cloak Pavilion's vitality will be greatly damaged this time, but it will also stimulate all their hidden potential. The Blood Cloak Pavilion should never be an alliance of a group of weaklings, but should be more proactive and aggressive, fully showing their muscles to the ninja world. Bishui looked at the blood cloak of the former banishment elder hanging in the attic's hall, and said very cruelly. But it was inevitable that some unbearable feelings flashed in his eyes. This is the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Chapter 233. The sounds of killing and the final roars of life could be heard. Life was splattered on the ground along with the life of the dead. Qingmu, Qiyan, Ruijin, and Ho Tu, the four altar lords of the Blood Robe Pavilion, saw all of this with their own eyes. They were anxious and angry, and they wished that they could save more of their disciples. But they could only see puppets launching fierce attacks towards them from all around. And from time to time, clay figurines were thrown down from the sky. They suddenly discovered that Blood Cloth Pavilion, which they were very proud of and had always been very confident in, was so weak in front of such power. This is our Blood Cloth Pavilion? No. Blood Cloth Pavilion should not be like this. Blood Cloth Pavilion should never be a lamb to be slaughtered. Our Qiyan altar, our Ruijin altar, our Ho Tu altar, these are our most powerful forces, but they are not here at this moment. If all of our forces were here, then how could we have fallen into such a situation? I regret it. If they had really listened to Bai Shui's suggestion, then Blood Cloth Pavilion would not be in such a passive situation at this moment. We are still a group of proud tigers and leopards, we are definitely not such lambs. Bai Shui had not appeared from beginning to end, and everyone knew that Bai Shui was inside Blood Cloth Pavilion. But perhaps it was because she was hurt too much? Bai Shui had not shown her figure. This is also good. At least if all four altar masters of 5 elements altar were to die here, then there would be one person who could command the overall situation, so that Blood Cloth Pavilion would not fall into the most dangerous situation. Qingmu was thinking like this, and other 3 altar masters were also thinking like this. Because in this situation, even if Bai Shui really appeared, she would not be able to do much. No matter how proficient she was in using whip, how could she fight against dozens of fearless puppets who were besieging her, and how could she fight against enemies who were hovering in the sky? But Blood Cloth Pavilion had already lost a lot of people, and the number of dead and seriously injured people had already reached the level of 60%. But at this time, all the people of Akatsuki organization unexpectedly began to slowly withdraw from the battlefield. Quick. Everyone rescue the injured people around you as soon as possible. When Qingmu discovered that Akatsuki organization had begun to withdraw, he did not even think about it, and immediately began to rescue the injured. These people could not be allowed to die. These people were the young disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion, the future hope of the Blood Garment Pavilion. They could not be buried here. The people of Akatsuki organization gradually gathered together, and stood in a huge square formation. Deidara, who was hovering in the sky, and Sasori, who was controlling the puppets, also returned to Akatsuki's formation. Qiyin, Ho Tu, and Ruijin also arrived in front of Greenwood. The 4 of them stood in a row. Some of the surviving disciples of the Blood Clothing Pavilion also brought some of the wounded who could still be saved behind them. From time to time, painful howls could be heard from behind them. The contrast between both sides was very obvious. Although Akatsuki organization didn't have any excited roar, but everyone's eyes carried a kind of pride that was difficult to disperse. This is our organization, this is our strength. The people of Blood Garment Pavilion didn't have time to pay attention to the mental appearance of Akatsuki organization's people, because almost all of them were trying their best to rescue the wounded on their side. If they hesitated for a moment, then their life might be lost. Not to mention mourning everywhere, but everyone's eyes were filled with deep sadness. Qiyan, Ruijin, Ho Tu, and Qingmu, who were closely watching Akatsuki organization's formation, also had gloomy expression. Akatsuki organization already occupied an extremely big advantage. As long as they were willing, after paying a very small price, the headquarters of Blood Garment Pavilion would be directly annihilated. Even if these altar masters were lucky enough to preserve their lives, but they could only run away like stray dogs. But now Akatsuki organization didn't attack and abandoned their advantage, so naturally it was because they had a bigger scheme, wasn't it? Suddenly a figure appeared in the sky. Behind her, there was a pair of snow-white wings. No, those wings were not composed of feathers, rather a pair of wings made of white paper. God's emissary, Akatsuki's white tiger Conan, had arrived at the battlefield. Conan controlled the wings behind her back to slowly descend, and stood in front of the ninjas of Akatsuki organization. Her eyes were looking straight at the four altar masters of Blood Garment Pavilion, but she was so calm as if she was looking at ants. God summoned you to our embrace. Conan lightly opened her mouth, and her cold voice under the support of chakra instantly resounded throughout the entire battlefield. God. The people of Blood Garment Pavilion were very puzzled. Was there really a god in this world? But the ninjas of Akatsuki organization indeed had fanatical expression, as if they were representing God and had come here to recruit the disciples of Blood Garment Pavilion. They were very proud and arrogant. Bullshit, God. Don't you just want us to join you and become your pawns and cannon in your hands? Although we are at a disadvantage in this battle, but we don't know if there will be another battle. We Blood Garment Pavilion are not afraid of blood staining our clothes. You want us to become a group of cowards and become your subordinate slaves? You are not qualified. Hearing the words of Conan, Scarlet Flame was the first to stand up. If not for the fact that Conan was a woman, Scarlet Flame might have already started cursing. But although these words were not so eloquent, but it was enough to motivate the disciples of Blood Garment Pavilion behind the four altar masters. There were a lot of young people in the headquarters of Blood Garment Pavilion. Being young meant being more unyielding, and they didn't have the almost greasy sleekness of those older people. Many of them had already stood up, regardless of whether they were injured or not, regardless of whether they were about to die or not. One by one they began to roar towards the heaven. That's right. Blood staining our clothes, we are not afraid. This is our Blood Garment Pavilion. The slightly older people beside them wanted to pull them back, but all the young people remained unmoved. Instead they shouted even more loudly. Blood staining our clothes, we are not afraid. Blood staining our clothes, we are not afraid. Blood staining our clothes, we are not afraid. Nangongja stood in the attic, and looked at the roaring youngsters of Blood Garment Pavilion with a smile. Blood Garment Pavilion, isn't this still Blood Garment Pavilion? Chapter 234. Looking at the Bloodcloth Pavilion disciples who were clearly covered in cuts and bruises still able to stand up, Nangongja also felt that the Bloodcloth Pavilion still had the qualifications to save them. Holding the hilt of the Heavenly Disaster Sword in his hand, Nangongja prepared to join the battle. However, Bai Shui stretched out her hand and stopped Nangongja. Now is not the time. If you show up now you will be in trouble. Although you can leave a good impression on the Bloodcloth Pavilion, we won't be able to achieve our goal. Whether it is subduing the Bloodcloth Pavilion or finding the culprit who massacred the village, we have to wait until those people's flaws are truly exposed. Nangongja couldn't help but look at Bai Shui. Someone once said, the mouth of a green snake is the sting of a wasp's tail. Neither is poisonous, but the most poisonous is a woman's heart. It wasn't because he discriminated against women, but because once a woman hardened her heart, she would often be calmer than a man and would be more willing to give up more things. At this moment Bai Shui was in such a state. Although at the beginning when she saw the Bloodcloth Pavilion disciples being slaughtered, Bai Shui also couldn't bear to watch. But after forcibly restraining the impulse in her heart, Bai Shui suddenly calmed down. She entered an extremely cold state, like a machine analyzing everything. Since people had already died, then it didn't matter whether more or less died. Since in order to achieve the goal, there was no harm in sacrificing more. The same principle was actually the same as when a girl bought things. After clenching her teeth and stamping her feet to buy a super expensive thing, when she saw other things that she liked, she would also buy them without hesitation. In any case, she had already bought such expensive things, buying more or less would only end up eating dirt. So, she might as well enjoy herself first and buy. This could also be regarded as a disguised form of smashing a broken jar. Right? Let's look at the battlefield again. Although the Bloodcloth Pavilion disciples were all roaring towards the sky, their expressions were as if they would directly fight to the death with the Akatsuki organization as long as someone gave the order. However, Xiaonan's face was still as indifferent as ever. She gently lifted her foot. Conan took a few steps forward, and almost reached the center of the battlefield. Since you are so unconvinced, then how about we have a battle? We will each send a team of people from our own faction and fight in a melee. If the other side is completely defeated, then we will win. If our Akatsuki organization wins, then your Blood Cloth Pavilion will be integrated into Akatsuki organization, henceforth no disloyalty. Once our Akatsuki organization loses, we will immediately retreat, and never take the initiative to invade Blood Cloth Pavilion. Sasori Dara come. Them and me, this is our lineup. Hearing Conan's summon, Sasori and Deidara also came out from the Akatsuki's ninja's position, although Deidara looked unhappy. Sasori was to Sasori to were. As for you all you four with Cloth Pavilion with you. Every altar master of Blood-Robed Pavilion had never thought of such a condition, because honestly speaking, Akatsuki organization indeed occupied an extremely advantageous position. But Conan's words unexpectedly directly gave up their advantage in numbers, and turned to compete with Blood Cloth Pavilion's high-end battle strength. In the battle just a moment ago, several altar masters of Blood Cloth Pavilion actually already knew what kind of high-end battle strength Akatsuki organization had at this moment. It was none other than Conan, Sasori who controlled puppets, and Dara who used explosive clay. And Blood Cloth Pavilion had Aoki, Ruejin, Hutu and Scarlet Flame, 5 altar masters. In the situation of 3 against 4, the possibility of Blood Cloth Pavilion's victory was greatly increased. But at the same time, Conan also ruthlessly pulled off the face of Blood Cloth Pavilion, threw it on the ground and ruthlessly stepped on it. She even felt that it was not enough to satisfy her, so she added the last sentence. It could be said that she used her foot to ruthlessly crush the face of Blood Cloth Pavilion. You woman, since you want to fight, then let's fight. But you despise us like this, I can't bear it. 3 against 4? See how I, your father, will beat all 3 of you. Scarlet Flame directly took out his long blade, and looked at the 3 people of Akatsuki organization with an angry face. Aoki hurriedly stepped forward and pulled Scarlet Flame's arm. Scarlet Flame wanted to speak, but Aoki was looking at Scarlet Flame with his most serious expression. Scarlet Flame had no choice but to shut his mouth, and look at the 3 people of Akatsuki organization with his eyes wide open. This guy is a reckless person, don't mind him. Akatsuki organization directly attacked our headquarters and caused great damage. Our Blood Cloth Pavilion has nothing to say, our Blood Cloth Pavilion is weak and deserves to be beaten. But since you have proposed such a rule, if we don't properly grasp it, then we will waste this opportunity. Each of us has our own lofty and unyielding character, but what we bear on our shoulders is not only our own honor and life, but also the life of thousands of disciples of Blood Cloth Pavilion. I accept this challenge on behalf of Blood Cloth Pavilion's altar masters. Aoki looked at Conan, Sasori and Dara who were standing in front of Akatsuki organization's formation and said, if he was 30 or 40 years old, perhaps he would also directly go up like Scarlet Flame behind him, and directly decide life and death with those people who had humiliated Blood Cloth Pavilion. But he had already lived for so long, and had already passed that young and frivolous stage. If he agreed to such a challenge, then he would only be ridiculed by others. If he didn't agree to this challenge, then he would be disregarding the lives of countless disciples of Blood Cloth Pavilion. Which was more important, Aoki was very clear in his heart. No matter what kind of humiliation, no matter how angry he was, as long as he could preserve his own life, then he would have the opportunity to settle accounts with them one by one. Aoki's words were not only said to the people of Akatsuki organization, but also to himself, to Scarlet Flame, to several altar masters of Blood Cloth Pavilion, and to those disciples standing behind him. You are humiliated? You are angry? That is the result of your own incompetence. If you are strong and invincible, then who can give you such humiliation? All the bad situations in this world are caused by the incompetence of the people involved. Scarlet Flame obviously understood the meaning of Aoki's words, and the hot blood that had rushed to his head also slowly faded away. At this moment, Scarlet Flame didn't have the same kind of exaggeration and recklessness as before, instead he was very silent. Silently holding his long blade, he silently stood in front of Aoki, and silently looked at those ninjas of Akatsuki organization who had caused great humiliation to Blood Cloth Pavilion. Chapter 235. Seeing Akame, who was the most impulsive among them, quietly standing beside Aoki, Ruejin and Ho-Tu also took a few steps to Aoki's side. Long blade, dragon head wooden staff, golden sword and gauntlets. The 4 of them held their weapons tightly. Blood Cloth Pavilion, Akame, Ho-Tu, Ruejin, and Aoki are here to challenge you. Blood Cloth Pavilion's disciples looked at the 4 altar masters standing in front of them, their hearts surging. Those altar masters who were usually unreachable and aloof, were still willing to stand up and protect the Blood Garment Pavilion and disciples like him, who had not played any role at all at such a time. Conan looked at the 4 altar masters standing in front of the Blood Cloth Pavilion's disciples and said, "In that case, our bet is established. Let's have a fight here, the winner will decide the winner." No one shouted the start of the fight, no one acted as the referee. Whether it was the 4 altar masters of Blood Cloth Pavilion or the 3 ninjas of Akatsuki, they all began to prepare to attack. Deidara stretched out his hands and pieces of clay were spat out by the mouth in his palms. While flying in the air, the clay unceasingly shaped itself into a clay bird with 2 pairs of wings. Explosive clay, 2-winged bird. Compared to small birds, 2-winged bird was a bit faster because of its 2 pairs of wings. After overtaking Xiao Nan, who was at the front, the 2-winged bird flew toward the 4 altar lords of the Blood Garment Pavilion. The double-winged bird's flight path was not in a straight line. Instead, it was like a living bird or a nimble swallow flying in the sky. It was using a fast and strange method to continuously approach the 4 altar masters of the Blood Garment Pavilion. "Come on." Seeing this situation, Ho-Tu also rushed forward and became the vanguard of the 4 altar masters of Blood Cloth Pavilion. The huge gauntlets in his hands were already suffused with a little yellow brilliance because of the infusion of internal strength. The gauntlets were not ordinary, instead, it had a piece of gauntlet. The gauntlet was extremely heavy, clearly having a good defensive power. "Your little tricks, Ho-Tu will block them all." Ho-Tu was tall and had a lot of robust muscles all over his body, simply a living brother. But Ho-Tu's speed was extremely fast, his pair of eyes constantly looking at the 2-winged bird flying in the air. Suddenly, Ho-Tu raised his left hand above his head. In less than a second, a 2-winged bird took the initiative to fall into Ho-Tu's hand and collided with his left hand. That was a 2-winged bird made of explosive clay. In the battle just now, everyone was well aware of how powerful the clay was. However, Ho-Tu dared to hold such a bomb in his hand. Boom. As expected, the moment the 2-winged bird was caught by the thick soil, it exploded. At the same time, the explosion brought a cloud of smoke. Deadale was surprised to see that there was someone in the Blood Clothing Pavilion who would use their own body to block his explosive clay. Could it be that he was an idiot? But since Ho-Tu was willing to use his body to block the explosion, Deadale naturally didn't mind making the explosion more violent. With a wave of his hand, the 2-winged birds that were still flying in the sky all flew towards Ho-Tu like pigeons returning to their nests. Bang, bang, ong. The sound of the explosion was endless. Very good. The battle had just begun, and he had already taken down one of the Blood Clothing Pavilion's forces. Now that the number of people on both sides was tied, the battle would be much easier. While Deidara was thinking, Ho-Tu's slightly simple and honest voice came from the smoke. "This kind of attack is really troublesome. Makes me feel dirty. It will take me a long time to go back and wash my clothes." A fist wind instantly spread out in the smoke, directly dispersing the smoke like tearing a piece of cloth. Ho-Tu's body was soon completely revealed. Although the explosion had burned many holes in his clothes, and his hair had turned a little brown because of the smoke, there were no obvious scars on his body. Scorpion saw all of this. Was the body of an internal force practitioner at such a level? Scorpion's eyes immediately lit up. Such a body was simply a good material for making puppets. But then Scorpion also had some doubts. Could his scalpel cut open Ho-Tu's flesh? This was really a problem. Scorpion had not won yet, but he had already begun to think about the possible results after his victory. This was really, soon the long-range probing between the two sides was over. This so-called long-range probing was actually just the Blood Clothing Pavilion being bombarded by Deidara. Rue-Jin followed behind Ho-Tu, and when the two sides began to approach each other, Rue-Jin held the golden sword in his hand tightly, and a golden brilliance hovered above the golden sword. Rue-Jin rushed directly in Scorpion's direction. Scorpion's puppet was a huge threat. Once Scorpion could fully display his puppet technique, he could at least entangle 2 of the Blood Clothing Pavilion's forces. Then the Blood Clothing Pavilion would be at a disadvantage. As long as he could take down Scorpion as soon as possible, the Blood Clothing Pavilion would have enough strength to deal with the explosive clay thrown by Deidara and defeat Lil Nan. Go to hell. Unlike Nangong's swordsmanship that focused on sword momentum, Rue-Jin's swordsmanship completely increased his speed to an unparalleled level. Not only his swordsmanship, but Rue-Jin's movement was also extremely fast. In a few flashes, he had already arrived in front of Scorpion. Perhaps because Scorpion had transformed most of his body into a puppet, and at the same time he had also drilled into the thick Filiu, so whether it was his reaction speed or his own speed, they were not very fast. When Rue Jin arrived in front of him, Scorpion barely managed to move his tail in front of him to block Rue Jin's golden sword. But when the two collided, there was no sound of collision. Instead, Rue Jin's golden sword directly cut off Scorpion's Filiu tail like cutting tofu. Rue Jin not only did not stop attacking, but he also attacked faster, stabbing Scorpion's chest with his sword. In the distance, Deidara had already noticed Scorpion's predicament, and immediately controlled a two-winged bird to crash into Rue Jin. Although Rue Jin's attack power was very high, his defense was still not as good as Ho-Tu's. Rue Jin also understood the power of the two-winged bird, so he directly changed the golden sword in his hand from stabbing to sweeping, leaving a long wound on Filiu's chest, and directly jumped back to kill the two-winged bird that was flying towards him. Chapter 236. Looking at Rue Jin, who was standing in front of him, even though his heart had become a little slow after being transformed into a puppet, it was filled with an emotion called fear at this moment. Just a little bit, just a little bit. If Deidara didn't control the winged bird in front of him in time to restrain Rue Jin's sword, he would have been penetrated by Rue Jin's sword. He has indeed transformed most of his body into a puppet, and if there are any broken parts he can replace them with spare parts, but his heart has been transformed by himself into his own power core and his consciousness. If Rue Jin's sword really succeeded, his heart would have been pierced. You really can't be underestimated. Because of the crisis just now, Sasori also said to Rue Jin very seriously. Rue Jin held the golden sword in his hand in front of him, the tip of the sword was slightly raised and looked at Sasori very coldly and said, "I am the altar lord of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, this kind of strength is what I should have, isn't it?" Sasori didn't answer Rue Jin's words, but opened the scroll on his back and laid it flat on the ground. There were various inscriptions written inside the scroll, and Sasori made several seals inside the scroll to activate the spells applied on the scroll. After a burst of smoke, a person with fluffy and long blue hair wearing a black cloak appeared in Rue Jin's sight. Although it's called a person, it's actually not a person because the person's face has an obvious structure like that of a puppet. However, this puppet exuded an extremely powerful aura, as if it was really a living person. "This is my most complacent puppet. Your strength is worthy of me letting it reappear in the light of day. The legendary strongest Kazekage of Sunagakure, the 3 generations Kazekage." Sasori's tone was still low and hoarse, but Rue Jin was keenly aware of a trace of excitement from Sasori's tone. "I didn't expect that the missing 3 generations Kazekage of Sunagakure would actually be in your hands, and even be made into a puppet by you. Poor hero of a generation, in the end, he will become a weapon in the hands of unworthy descendants." The ideology of the Blood Cloak Pavilion is relatively conservative compared to the shinobi world. Respect for the dead and basic respect for the strong is a widespread concept in the Blood Cloak Pavilion. 3 generations Kazekage was the Kazekage of Sunagakure where Sasori came from. He and Sasori had a bit of relationship, but Sasori turned the Kazekage of his village into a puppet. It was really unacceptable. "Shut up." As if Rue Jin's words had stung Scorpion's nerves, Scorpion hysterically rebuked Rue Jin. "What do you know? Humans, as long as they were still alive, would always have to face the threat of death. I let Kazekage become my eternal art. Even after his death, there will be countless people who will remember him for what he did." There was no more death, only eternity. This is what true art looks like. Scorpion's body was still hidden in Filiu's body, but strands of chakra threads extended out from Filiu's body and connected to the 3 generations wind puppets. "Let me show you how powerful eternal art is. Puppet Jutsu, Thousand Hands Technique." The arms of the 3 generations Kazekage stretched out from the black cloak. The pale arms and the aura of defeat all proved that the 3 generations Kazekage had died. There were also many talismans on the arms. When Scorpion shouted the name of the technique, the talisman seemed to be activated. The arms of the 3 generations wind puppets quickly duplicated under the effect of the talismans, densely attacking Rue Jin. If the number of arms was less, Rue Jin felt that he might have a chance to escape. But at this moment, there seemed to be at least hundreds of thousands of arms in front of him, attacking him from different directions, and the speed was extremely fast. Rue Jin's figure kept retreating, but he still couldn't catch up with the speed of the arms. Rue Jin's eyes became particularly sharp at this moment, as if he had decided something. His speed increased again, but this time he didn't retreat, but hit the place where the arms were the most concentrated. If he blindly hoped to avoid Scorpion's attack, it would only consume a lot of his stamina and put him in a more dangerous situation later. So at this time, it was better to directly face the difficulties and seek survival in death. Stupid. Seeing Rui Jin directly rushing towards the arms he had summoned, Scorpion coldly said such a sentence. These were not just ordinary arms, Scorpion had also modified a lot of mechanisms. Once surrounded, he would face endless hidden weapons and poisonous smoke. Seek survival in death? It's not that no one wanted to deal with this method, but everyone who did so would only become a corpse with countless wounds and hidden weapons. Moreover, Scorpion didn't intend to slowly trap Rui Jin to death. His companions were also fighting at the moment. Once he won, his side would be able to reduce the number of opponents to 3. If only comparing the individual combat ability, Blood Clothing Pavilion couldn't compare with Akatsuki organization. Otherwise, at this moment, not far from him, Akame and Aoki wouldn't be entangled with Conan so hard, and Hotu also wouldn't go all out to prevent Deidara from using his explosive clay to break the deadlock. Under the control of Scorpion, 3 generations of wind puppets pulled out their arms from the cage formed by countless arms. Although they were puppets, but 3 generations of wind puppets began to quickly make hand seals. Magnetic release, Iron Sand Sword. 3 generations of wind puppets spat out such a blunt word, but the effect was extremely significant. Grains of black iron sand slowly floated up from the soil, forming black swords. 3 generations of wind puppets raised their hands, and several black iron sand swords were inserted into the cage formed by arms, and the mechanisms in those arms had already been activated by Scorpion. From time to time, green or purple smoke would flow out from the gaps in the iron sand swords. Scorpion nodded and felt that the threat of Rui Jin had been eliminated, so he turned around and looked towards the direction where Conan, Aoki and Akame were fighting. Deidara and Hotu were fighting back and forth. No matter what kind of attack Deidara used, Hotu would receive it one by one. And each bombardment of Hotu would also be dodged by Deidara, relying on his advantage in the air. Although it looked very anxious, but there was no danger at all. Chapter 237. Looking at the battlefield, Nangongja furrowed his brows. He and Bai Shui thought that Hotu and Rui Jin were the suspects who attacked their village. But at this moment, Hotu was in a perilous situation and could only take a beating. Rui Jin was even more miserable. He was directly trapped in the cage formed by the arms and was even pierced by the huge iron sand sword. It was already difficult for him to save his own life. Nangongja was very puzzled by the performance of these 2 people. Were these people who fought for the Bloodcloth Pavilion really the kind of people who would go crazy and slaughter an entire village just to get the Tribulation Sword? Nangongja's mind was a little chaotic at this moment, but the battlefield would not change because of Nangongja's mood. At this moment, Scorpion was controlling Fei Lu, who to slowly approach the battlefield where Xiao Nan, Qing Mu and Qi Yan were fighting. Qi Yan's long sword was also injected with a large amount of internal strength. At this moment, his internal strength had turned into a thin film that covered the weapon, increasing its power. Instead, his internal strength completely overflowed from the long sword, entangling with each other like a burning red flame on the long sword. Conan kept using her paper dance to control the paper to attack Akane, but every time a piece of paper came into contact with Akane's long sword, it would ignite as if it had come into contact with fire. Not only Qi Yan, but Qing Mu also attacked Xiao Nan with his dragon-head wooden staff from time to time. Although Greenwood was old, the strength in his hands was extremely great. The dragon-head wooden staff in his hands was swung around vigorously, creating a gust of wind. Every time Xiao Nan's height decreased, Aoki would use his internal strength to increase his jumping ability. He would directly jump into the air and fiercely hit Xiao Nan. Although the paper dance didn't consume much of Xiao Nan's internal strength, controlling the white paper to turn into wings to let her fly in the air began to consume some chakra. In this way, Akane's attacks were constantly worn down by Akane, and Aoki repeatedly prevented him from landing on the ground to recover his chakra. At this moment, Xiao Nan's chakra had decreased by almost a third. She was in a dangerous situation. Scorpion seemed to have noticed this, so he gave up helping Deadale to destroy Ho Tuesday. Instead, he walked towards Xiao Nan, wanting to fight the enemy together with her. Magnetic release, Iron Sand attack. 3 generations of wind shadow puppets spat out these words. A large amount of iron sand particles that were extracted from the soil to form the iron sand sword emerged from the ground. It was as if the iron sand had a life of its own. In an instant, it formed a huge rotating arrowhead that attacked Red Flame. At this moment, Scarlet Flame was also struggling to block the paper that Xiaonan shot at him. He had no way to divert his attention to Scorpion's iron sand drill. Qing Mu tapped his dragon head wooden staff, and a majestic internal energy emanated from Qing Mu's aged body. Under the stimulation of Qing Mu's internal strength, his originally black and white hair turned back to black in many places, and the crisscrossing wrinkles on his face seemed to have been smoothed out. Obviously, Qing Mu was ready to go all out at this moment. Thick earth was completely pinned down by the enemy and Ruijin was trapped. He and Red Flame could barely block Xiaonan's attacks, but once the young and strong Red Flame was successfully ambushed by Scorpion, he could only drag his old body to block the attacks of Xiaonan and Scorpion. Even if he used all his skills, it might not work. If he didn't go all out now, when would he? Qing Mu gathered the dragon head wooden staff in his hand, and his internal strength had already drilled into the dragon head wooden staff in an instant. A dragon-shaped internal strength constantly hovered above the dragon head wooden staff, as if it was about to leave the staff and attack by itself. But no matter how hard the internal strength turned into a dragon, it still couldn't leave the dragon head wooden staff. In the end, it was still a little bit lacking. Qing Mu couldn't help but shake his head, but he still rushed toward the iron sand drill released by Scorpion. Qing Mu's vigorous internal strength was actually close to the realm of releasing internal strength, which was different from Nangong's sword qi. It was a kind of internal strength that had reached the peak. Qing Mu obviously hoped that he could receive a certain stimulation in such a crisis, so that his internal strength could reach the realm of releasing internal strength. But he still failed, and his internal strength couldn't completely separate from his weapon. Cyan-colored internal force continued to be generated from Qing Long's body on the dragon head wooden staff. Not long after, it wrapped around Qing Long's body like a hurricane. It also turned into a drill bit and rushed towards Scorpion's iron sand drill bit. But the direction of rotation of the two was actually completely opposite, whether it was intentional or not. Just as the two drill bits were about to collide, the cyan internal energy drill bit quietly dispersed its tip. It directly wrapped the iron sand drill bit released by Scorpion inside. Because the two were rotating in different directions, they began to affect each other and gradually collapsed. Bang! A muffled sound came, and whether it was the green internal strength or the black iron sand drill, they all exploded and scattered in the sky. Qing Mu's face seemed to be a little pale, and it was obvious that the consumption just now wasn't as small as he thought. The situation reached a balance. Now Xiaonan was fighting Red Flame, Dead Ale was fighting Thick Earth, and Scorpion was fighting Qing Mu. The 3 versus 3 battle had begun. Without the help of that old man, I don't know if you can really stop me. Xiaonan floated in the sky, looking down at Red Flame as if she was looking at an ant crawling on the ground. I hate people like you who pretend to be something. Although I have a cheap mouth, I never pretend to be something. Do you know why? Because it's really too ugly. Look at your current face. Ugly? Xiaonan's face could even be called a goddess, and that kind of cold temperament was simply an existence that countless people would go crazy for. However, Scarlet Flame directly spat out the word ugly. Really? I'm ugly? But I'll make you even uglier. Xiaonan didn't show any anger on her face, and her expression was still cold. But what she said just now, for some reason, was similar to, I'll beat you until your mother can't recognize you. Chapter 238. Conan opened her hands and a burst of chakra visible to the naked eye surged on Conan's body. Although the chakra didn't seem to have any obvious pattern, it was obvious that most of the chakra was rushing towards Conan's wings. After being stimulated by the chakra, the white paper peeled off from the wings one by one. Even the wings that originally allowed Conan to fly in the sky had become very thin, and Conan's figure was slowly descending. Paper release, infinite paper shuriken. Originally, in order to prevent Aoki from interfering when she was concentrating on fighting Akame, Conan kept the wings on her back so that she could always float in the sky to avoid the attacks of Aoki and Akame. But now Aoki was obviously entangled by Sasori and couldn't get away for a while. Then he would be able to attack Scarlet Flame to his heart's content. Countless pieces of white paper moved by themselves in the air, and shurikens appeared in the air one after another. Conan waved her hand, and all the shurikens flew towards Akame. It's useless. Although the paper shurikens were shurikens, they were still made of paper. In the previous battle, Akame attached his internal force to the long sword to achieve an effect that was close to a real flame to burn Conan's attacks. Now Conan's ninjutsu only increased the number and frequency of paper shurikens. As long as he used his internal force to resist, he wouldn't fall into any dangerous situation. Moreover, although the battle between Aoki and Sasori seemed to be very exciting, Aoki was already old. Now this kind of combat power was completely overdrawing his body. He could only hold on for a while, there was no way to last long. Now his strength was still restrained by Conan to a certain extent, so why not use his own strength to defeat Conan? At the same time become the key to breaking the stalemate in the battle? It had to be said that the final winner in this battle had little to do with personal ability. Instead, it depended on who could be the first to break away from their opponent's entanglement and become the power to disrupt the battle. The party with the power to disrupt the battle would be the final winner. Originally, the Blood Cloak Pavilion had the advantage. After all, it was a 3 versus 4 battle. But Ruijin was defeated immediately, and he didn't even effectively weaken Sasori's strength. It made the power of both sides reach a state of near balance, which made people feel very uncomfortable. Moreover, Qingmu of the Blood Garment Pavilion was already old. When it came to a competition of endurance and stamina, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Crimson Flame knew that he had to create the key to breaking the situation. His internal energy rushed into the long saber without any regard for his life. With so much internal energy pouring into the long saber, the effect was naturally outstanding. The internal force flames that were originally rising from the long saber now seemed to have been poured with gasoline, burning even more fiercely. Ha! Qi Yen drew a circle around his body with his long saber, and the flames condensed from his internal energy left their traces in the air. It was like a ring of fire was wrapped around Akame Yan's body. Akame Yan waited for the paper shuriken to rush into the ring of fire. Just as Scarlet Flame expected, the paper shuriken inevitably entered the ring of fire when it shot towards Scarlet Flame's body. But the development after that was completely different from Scarlet Flame's imagination. The paper shuriken didn't seem to be affected by the ring of fire. Although its surface was a little scorched because of the high temperature, it still flew towards Scarlet Flame's body. Scarlet Flame immediately realized that the situation was not good. He waved the long saber in his hand, trying to shoot down the paper shuriken that attacked him. But after all, he had lost the initiative. After blocking a lot of paper shuriken, Scarlet Flame's body was still inevitably hit by the paper shuriken. When the paper shuriken caused damage to Scarlet Flame's body, it didn't stay on Scarlet Flame's body. Instead, it flew up and left Scarlet Flame's body. It flew to Conan's side as if it was ready to attack again. It turned out that this was the so-called infinite of the paper shuriken. Each paper shuriken was always under Conan's control. When it caused damage to the enemy, the paper shuriken would return to Conan's side for the next attack. I think you must think that my paper shuriken is just pure paper that is restrained by flames, right? When I first learned how to use paper shuriken, such a trick couldn't be used because it was wet in the rain. Since then, I have been looking for a variety of ways to let my paper release avoid being restricted by various unfavorable factors. I have overcome water, so how can I not consider fire? Although Conan was talking, Scarlet Flame had no time to respond to Conan's words. Endless shuriken kept shooting at him. In order to reduce the damage he received, Scarlet Flame has almost put all his mind into blocking the shuriken. However, when she saw Scarlet Flame's appearance, a rare smile appeared on Xiaonan's face. When a shuriken rushed into the fire circle on Scarlet Flame's body, an explosion sounded. Alright, I forgot to tell you. I added some materials to my paper shuriken. Isn't it very interesting to make a shuriken from an explosive talisman? The force of the explosion caused Red Flame's body to tilt, and even more shurikens pierced Red Flame's body while he was unable to block them. Conan seemed to feel a little happy because of her mischievous behavior. Wasn't the victory already decided? But what Conan couldn't see was that Scarlet Flame's eyes gradually became red as the wounds on his body continued to increase. The people of Scarlet Flame alter. We have said before that they are a group of madmen who love to fight. When they receive damage, their bodies will also be stimulated because of it. Scarlet Flame's eyes at this moment were particularly red, and from time to time internal force would condense in them, as if his eyes were burning with flames. The deepest madness is often born in pain and silence. Scarlet Flame's movements to block the shuriken began to slow down. Because of the wounds on his body, Scarlet Flame's face began to become pale. The sound of the paper shuriken piercing the flesh was so clear, it was like a side of the war drum was constantly being beaten. Chapter 239. Xiaonan's eyes were fixed on Qi Yen, because she had to determine when Qi Yan had truly lost his combat power before she could rush to the other two battlefields. But when Xiaonan's eyes were fixed on Qi Yan, a dong 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 sound gradually sounded in her ears. At first, the sound was very weak, but as Qi Yan's injuries became more and more serious, and her movements became more and more sluggish, the sound became clearer and clearer. This sound seemed to have a sense of desolation and solemnity, as if it existed for the sake of war. War drums. For some reason, such a word suddenly appeared in Xiaonan's mind. A solemn, low and desolate dong-dong sound, wasn't that the truest portrayal of the war drums? Qi Yan suddenly stopped his slow movements. Even when the paper shurikens pierced his body, even when a shuriken transformed from an explosive talisman pierced Qi Yan's body and blew him to the ground, Qi Yan's body did not move at all. Xiaonan could already determine that Qi Yan had lost his combat power. Xiaonan turned around, wanting to go to Scorpion's aid and help him defeat Qing Mu. The sound of the war drums in Xiaonan's ears became louder and louder. Scarlet Flame had indeed fallen to the ground, but his eyes had been open the entire time. There was no confusion caused by the pain, nor was there any turbidity caused by the bleeding. It was a kind of pure fanaticism, just like the internal strength flame burning in Qi Yan's eyes at this moment. Qi Yan stabbed the long sword in his hand into the ground as a point of support, then slowly stood up. At this moment, Scarlet Flame's clothes had been reduced to rags, and even these rags were stained with dust and blood. Some of them were even charred due to the explosion. Xiaonan naturally noticed the movement behind her. She slowly turned her head to look at Qi Yan and said with a bit of pity, "This is just a gamble. This is just a bet. Even if we really win, we will only accept the Blood Garment Pavilion into our organization. We won't completely destroy the Blood Garment Pavilion. Why do you have to risk your life like this? You only have one life." When Xiaonan said this sentence, she couldn't help but think of Yahiko, who was willing to give up his life for the sake of Akatsuki. Yahiko's image may be a little bit similar to Qi Yan's image at this moment, right? Xiaonan couldn't help but say such a sentence. The ninja world has always been like this. Annexation between forces is an extremely normal thing. During the Warring States period, who knows how many clans and forces were submerged in the torrent of history. As long as you can save your own life, you will have more possibilities. This kind of thing, Yahiko at the beginning should also understand it now. But these two people like fools, their lives so cheap, Xiaonan found it very difficult to accept. Whoosh. A paper shuriken was instantly controlled by Conan, and it flew straight towards Red Flame. Qi Yan didn't even have the strength, he was directly hit by the paper shuriken. His body paused for a moment, but Red Flame still continued to walk towards Xiaonan. "Stop. I can still spare your life." Xiaonan ordered Scarlet Flame, but Scarlet Flame seemed to have closed his ears. He still walked towards Xiaonan like a robot. He waved his hand again. This time, the paper shuriken hit Scarlet Flame's calf, and it went deep into his calf. A little bit of blood soaked into the paper shuriken and dyed it red. Maybe it's because my calf muscles or bones are injured. At this moment, Scarlet Flame's footsteps were also halting. It was extremely difficult. However, Scarlet Flame didn't stop. "I told you to stop," Conan shouted. At this moment, Akame Yin was no longer just Akame Yin in Conan's eyes. Instead, Yahiko's figure was intertwined with Akame Yan's body. Ablaze's face slowly turned into Yahiko's face. When Conan looked at Akame's face, it was as if she was looking at Yahiko, who was determined to die. Another shuriken shot out, this time directly piercing Scarlet Flame's arm that was holding the long blade. Blood flowed from the wound and even reached the edge of the long saber. Originally, Scarlet Flame used the long blade as a support point to support himself, but now, every time the long blade was stabbed into the ground, a small pool of blood would be left on the ground. "Stop! Stop! Stop! Stop!" Xiaonan screamed hysterically. And every time little Nan yelled, a paper shuriken would shoot towards Red Flame. Scarlet Flame's face was more and more like Yahiko's. Even now, Scarlet Flame's figure had completely changed into Yahiko's image in Conan's mind. A drop of hot tears slowly flowed out of Conan's eyes. Conan slowly stretched out a finger and wiped the tears off her cheeks. "When Yahiko died, did I also shed tears like this?" Conan asked herself softly, but she couldn't find the answer at all. Yahiko has been dead for too long, right? There are only many vague faces in her memory. Even when she looked at pain made from Yahiko's corpse, Yahiko's face was still so vague in her mind. Did Yahiko really agree with what she and Nagato are doing now? Using violence to threaten the entire ninja world to bring peace? Is this really the beautiful future that Yahiko and I talked about? Conan couldn't help but think about it. Scarlet Flame's figure was getting closer and closer. Even if he was staggering, even if he was covered in wounds, he still walked step by step to Conan's side. He tried his best to exert strength in his legs so that he could stand more steadily. However, when he pulled out the long saber from the ground, his body inevitably trembled. Conan seemed to be immersed in an inexplicable emotion. She didn't feel anything at all. Scarlet Flame also fell into a paranoid instinct. Scarlet Flame just wanted to insert his long blade into the enemy's body to win. The two people who had lost control of their bodies confronted each other like this. Scarlet Flame held the long blade in his hand and stabbed it into Conan's abdomen. The silver-white blade continuously caused the enemy's blood to flow out along the blood groove. At this moment, Scarlet Flame seemed to have lost the last bit of strength to support his body and fell to the ground. Chapter 240. Looking at Conan and Scarlet Flame fighting each other, no one was able to react. Because Scarlet Flame had obviously fallen into a situation of being beaten. When those shurikens hit Scarlet Flame, the disciples of Blood-Robed Pavilion felt pain in their heart, because Scarlet Flame had disregarded his own safety in order to protect them, wasn't that so? Numerous disciples of Blood-Robed Pavilion wanted to rush up and bring back their altar lord, so that he wouldn't disregard his own life like this. But Akatsuki's ninjas were closely watching Blood-Robed Pavilion's disciples. When Scarlet Flame fell to the ground and Conan was hit by those shurikens, Akatsuki's people also couldn't sit still. Many people directly came up and wanted to pull Conan back to their camp for treatment. Since Akatsuki's people had already stepped forward, Blood-Robed Pavilion's disciples naturally also stepped forward to rescue Scarlet Flame. When Scarlet Flame fell to the ground, he still didn't loosen his grip on his shuriken, so shuriken was directly pulled out from Conan's abdomen, and blood splashed everywhere. Akatsuki's people lifted Conan up, but everyone's eyes were still staring at Scarlet Flame. If now Scarlet Flame was stabbed, wouldn't their harvest be great? But Blood-Robed Pavilion's disciples also saw the expression of Akatsuki's people, so they also closely stared at Akatsuki's people. Don't worry about them, bring Scarlet Flame back for treatment as soon as possible. Aoki had also been paying attention to Scarlet Flame's battlefield. When both sides began to confront each other, Scarlet Flame also opened his mouth to remind Blood-Robed Pavilion's disciples not to be impulsive and delay the treatment of Scarlet Flame's injuries. Sasori also stopped his attack on Aoki and said to Akatsuki's people, "First bring White Tiger back, Blood-Robed Pavilion's people don't need to care so much." Hearing the instructions of their leaders, both sides' ninjas and disciples also nodded their head, then brought their injured side back to their camp. When all the dust settled, when Sasori and Aoki were preparing to fight again, Sasori's eyes looked towards that arm cage formed when he used countless arms to trap Ruei-jin. At this moment, for some unknown reason, the arm cage unexpectedly began to slowly tremble, as if someone was carrying out a very high-intensity attack inside it. How could this be? Scorpion had great confidence in his poison and hidden weapons. When Ruei-jin entered the arm cage, Scorpion thought that Ruei-jin would not come out alive. Scorpion even used his iron sand sword to kill Ruei-jin. How could Ruei-jin come out alive? But perhaps things were just so unpredictable. Ruei-jin was indeed still alive. Crack. The sound of fragments falling to the ground was very obvious. Everyone saw the cage of arms shake violently, and the arms began to fall off one by one. A hole large enough for a person to pass through appeared in the arm cage. The purple and green poisonous fumes seemed to have found a place to vent as they started to flow out from the hole. A golden blade emerged from the thick smoke. The dazzling color of the blade could be seen clearly in the thick smoke. Ruei-jin's body came out from the hole along with his golden blade. Ruei-jin was not unscathed. On the contrary, there were a lot of wounds on his body, and a little bit of blood seemed to be unceasingly seeping out from those wounds. But Ruei-jin's mental state was very good. The unceasingly escaping aura from his body proved that Ruei-jin was perhaps in the best state in this battle. Ruei-jin also turned his head to look at the surrounding battlefield. Hotu was barely able to hold on, and Deidara was also unceasingly launching various attacks on Hotu's day. Both of them were still exchanging blows. Looking at the battlefield of Aoki and Sasori, Aoki's body already had a lot of wounds. Although his mental state was still very high, but it was very obvious that Aoki had forcibly stimulated his body. And at the place where the members of Akatsuki and Blood Clothing Pavilion were gathered, Conan and Akame were surrounded by a group of people in charge of medical treatment, and were undergoing emergency treatment. When Rue Jin understood the situation of the battlefield, he directly rushed towards the direction of Aoki with his golden sword. "How are you? Did you suffer any serious injuries?" Seeing that Rue Jin was already standing beside him, Greenwood asked with a slightly worried tone. Because the smoke inside the arm cage had already dispersed, and Aoki could still barely see the concealed weapons inside. "We can still fight. We have to deal with this guy as soon as possible. Then we will rush to the rescue of Ho Tuesday. The victory of this battle will inevitably belong to Blood Clothing Pavilion." When Rue Jin said that, the golden sword in his hand was slightly trembling. It seemed like he was excited to fight to his heart's content. After all, before Rue Jin could fully display his fighting strength, he was already trapped inside the arm cage, and was temporarily out of the battle. At this moment, a slight smile appeared on Aoki's old face. The current situation for Blood Clothing Pavilion could be said to be very good. Just a moment ago, when Akame and Conan were fighting fiercely, it was not like he didn't do anything. The clothes on Sasori's body were completely destroyed by Aoki, and Faleohu's body was exposed. There were even spiderweb-like cracks on it. Obviously, it was hit a few times by Aoki's dragon-head wooden staff. Although Aoki is old, whether it is experience or internal energy storage in his body, Aoki is one of the best existences. Whenever Sasori reveals the slightest flaw, Aoki will not let it go. Instead, he will attack fiercely. If Aoki was in his prime, even if he slowly consumes his strength, Sasori will definitely lose. Not to mention that he now has Rue Jin on his side. Taking down a ninja like Sasori who mainly relies on puppets to attack, and his own strength is not that strong, it's still easy and pleasant. Rue Jin held the golden sword in his hand horizontally in front of him, and waves of internal force continued to pour into the golden sword. The golden light gradually turned into light spots, and slowly revolved around the golden sword. Aoki also held the dragon-head wooden staff in his hand with both hands, and his eyes were very sharp. Sasori is like a prey waiting to be slaughtered at this moment. As long as he and Rue Jin attack, they will be able to take him down as soon as possible. After that, the three of them will attack Dead Ale together, and Blood Clothing Pavilion will win. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.